The stagecoach arrived empty. No bride, no letter, no explanation. Just an old driver shaking his head and whispering words that turned Jonah Callahan's blood to ice. The pass collapsed. Passengers scattered. Some didn't make it. Somewhere out there, in a frozen hell of white death, a woman he'd never met was dying, because she believed in him. Jonah saddled his horse and rode straight into the blizzard. He would find her, or he would die trying. If you want to witness one of the most heart-wrenching love stories ever told in the Old West, stay with me until the very end, and drop a comment below telling me which city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels across the world. The winter of 1883 came to the Colorado Territory like a thief in the night, silent, merciless, and utterly without warning. By the first week of December, the mountains surrounding the small town of Salida had transformed into a frozen fortress of white. Snow piled high against cabin walls. Ice sealed shut the doors of barns and stables. The wind howled through the valleys with a voice that sounded almost human, mournful, angry, hungry. For most folks in town, winter meant hunkering down. It meant rationing firewood, stretching salted meat, and praying the passes would clear before spring planting. It meant long nights by the fire, telling stories to children who grew restless from being trapped indoors. But for Jonah Callahan, this winter meant something else entirely. It meant waiting. Jonah stood at the window of his ranch house, his breath fogging the cold glass as he stared out at the endless white expanse. His land stretched for nearly 200 acres, good land, fertile land, land that had taken him 15 years to build into something respectable. He had cattle in the lower pastures, horses in the stable, a root cellar stocked with enough provisions to last until March. By all accounts, Jonah Callahan was a successful man, but success meant nothing when the house was this quiet. He turned away from the window and let his gaze drift to the kitchen table, where a single letter lay unfolded, its edges worn soft from being handled too many times. He knew every word by heart now. He'd read it so often that the ink had begun to fade in places where his fingers had traced the lines. Dear Mr. Callahan, I cannot express the joy your last letter brought me. To know that someone across these vast miles thinks of me, waits for me, believes in me, it is more than I ever dared to hope for. I have made my arrangements. I will depart Boston on December 1st and arrive in Salida by December 15th, God willing. The journey is long, and I confess I am frightened. I have never traveled west of Pennsylvania. I've never seen mountains or prairies or the wild country you describe so beautifully in your letters. But I am not afraid of the unknown, Mr. Callahan. I am only afraid of never taking the chance. I will see you soon. I will stand before you as a stranger, and yet I feel I already know you. Your words have been my comfort through many lonely nights. I hope, I pray, that when we meet, you will not be disappointed in the woman who wrote back. Yours faithfully, Eliza Ward. Jonah picked up the letter and held it close as if he could somehow feel her presence through the paper. Eliza Ward, a seamstress from Boston, 26 years old, brown hair, hazel eyes. At least that's what she'd written. She'd lost her parents to cholera 3 years ago and had been working in a textile factory ever since, barely earning enough to survive. When Jonah had first placed the advertisement in the Matrimonial Gazette, he hadn't expected much. He'd done it on a whim, really, after his friend Samuel had teased him about growing old alone. "You're 34 years old, Jonah," Samuel had said, laughing over whiskey at the saloon. "You've got a fine ranch, a good boy, and not a single woman within 50 miles who'll have you. What are you waiting for? Divine intervention?" "Maybe I am," Jonah had replied. But Samuel had pressed him, and eventually Jonah had written the advertisement. He'd described himself honestly, a widower with a 10-year-old son, a cattle rancher of modest means, a man who valued hard work and quiet evenings, and the simple pleasures of a life well lived. He hadn't expected anyone to respond, but Eliza had. Her first letter had arrived in September, and from the very first line, Jonah had felt something shift inside him. She wrote with intelligence and warmth, with humor and vulnerability. She asked questions about his life, his son, his land. She shared stories of her own, of growing up in a cramped Boston apartment, of learning to sew at her mother's knee, of dreaming about open spaces and fresh air and a life that meant something more than survival. Over the following weeks, they had exchanged a dozen letters. Each one grew longer, more intimate, more honest. Jonah found himself staying up late by candlelight, carefully crafting responses that would make her smile. He told her about Tommy, about the boy's love for horses, and his stubborn streak that reminded Jonah so much of his late wife, Catherine. He told her about the mountains, about the way the sunrise painted the peaks in shades of gold and pink. He told her about his loneliness, something he'd never admitted to anyone, and Eliza had written back, "You are not alone anymore, Mr. Callahan, not while I have breath to write to you." That was when Jonah knew. He was falling in love with a woman he'd never met. "Pa?" The small voice pulled Jonah from his thoughts. He turned to see Tommy standing in the doorway, wrapped in a wool blanket that dragged on the floor behind him. The boy's hair was mussed from sleep, his eyes still heavy with dreams. "What are you doing up, son?" Jonah asked, crossing the room to kneel before him. "It's not even dawn yet." "I heard you walking around," Tommy said. "You've been doing that a lot lately, walking and looking out the window." Jonah sighed and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I'm just thinking, that's all." "About the lady? The one who's coming?" "Yes," Jonah admitted. "About Miss Ward." Tommy was quiet for a moment, his young face thoughtful. He was small for his age, with his mother's dark hair and Jonah's stubborn jaw. Catherine had died when Tommy was only 4, a fever that swept through the territory and took her within a week. The boy barely remembered her now, though he kept a small daguerreotype of her face beside his bed. "Do you think she'll like me?" Tommy asked. The question broke Jonah's heart a little. "Of course she will," he said firmly. "How could anyone not like you?" "Jimmy Patterson says mail-order brides are just after money," Tommy said. "He says they don't really care about families. They just want to escape wherever they came from." Jonah felt a flash of anger at the Patterson boy, but he kept his voice calm. "Jimmy Patterson doesn't know what he's talking about. Miss Ward isn't like that. She's special, Tommy. You'll see." "How do you know?" Jonah considered the question. How did he know? He'd never seen Eliza's face, never heard her voice, never stood in the same room with her. Everything he knew about her came from words on paper, words that could be lies, could be exaggerations, could be the desperate fabrications of a woman trying to escape poverty. But he didn't believe that. He couldn't. "I know," Jonah said slowly, "because of the way she writes. There's a kindness in her words, Tommy, a honesty. When she tells me about her life, I can feel how much courage it takes for her to be truthful. That's not something a dishonest person does." Tommy seemed to consider this. "Ma was kind," he said quietly. "I remember that. She used to sing to me when I was scared of thunderstorms." Jonah's throat tightened. "Yes, she did. Do you think Miss Ward will sing to me?" "I don't know, son, but I think she'll try to make you happy. That's what matters." Tommy nodded slowly, then yawned. "When is she coming again?" "December 15th, Jonah said. 5 more days. That's forever." Despite everything, Jonah smiled. "It feels that way, doesn't it? Come on, let's get you back to bed. The sun's not up yet, and growing boys need their sleep." He guided Tommy back to his small room and tucked the blankets around him. As he turned to leave, Tommy's voice stopped him. "Pa?" "Yes?" "I hope she comes. I hope she's everything you think she is." Jonah stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the faint glow of the dying fire in the main room. "So do I, son," he said softly. "So do I." Maten. The days crawled by with agonizing slowness. Jonah threw himself into work, trying to keep his mind occupied. He repaired fences, checked on the cattle, chopped enough firewood to last until spring. He cleaned the house from top to bottom, scrubbing floors and washing windows, and making sure everything was perfect for Eliza's arrival. He'd even bought new curtains from the general store, pale blue fabric that Mrs. Henderson had assured him was very fashionable back east. He'd felt foolish hanging them, like a schoolboy trying to impress a girl at a church social. But he wanted Eliza to feel welcome. He wanted her to walk through that door and see a home, not just a house. On the morning of December 15th, Jonah woke before dawn. He dressed in his best clothes, a clean white shirt, dark trousers, the vest Catherine had made for him years ago. He shaved carefully, nicking his chin twice because his hands were trembling. He combed his hair, then combed it again, then gave up and let it fall the way it always did. "You look nervous," Tommy observed from the breakfast table, watching his father pace back and forth across the kitchen. "I'm not nervous," Jonah lied. "Your hands are shaking." "It's cold." "You're sweating." Jonah stopped pacing and looked at his son. The boy was grinning, actually grinning, for the first time in weeks. "You think this is funny?" Jonah asked. "A little bit," Tommy admitted. "I've never seen you like this, Pa. Not even when you had to give that speech at the town meeting last year. This is different." "Why?" Jonah opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. How could he explain? How could he tell a 10-year-old boy that he was about to meet the woman who might become his wife, his partner, his companion for the rest of his life? How could he describe the terror of hoping for something so deeply that the possibility of disappointment felt like a physical weight on his chest? "It just is," he finally said. "Now finish your breakfast. The stage is due at noon, and I want to be there early." They arrived at the stage depot at 11:30. The depot was little more than a wooden platform beside the main road, with a small office where the station master, Harold Finch, kept the schedules and handled the mail. A handful of other townspeople had gathered as well, some waiting for packages, others simply curious to see the famous mail-order bride everyone had been gossiping about. Jonah ignored the whispers and the sidelong glances. Let them talk. Let them wonder. He didn't care what anyone thought. All that mattered was that in less than an hour, Eliza would step off that stagecoach and his life would change forever. The minutes ticked by. Noon came and went. By 12:30, Jonah's confidence had begun to waver. Stages were often late, he told himself. The roads were difficult in winter. There was nothing to worry about. By 1 o'clock, he was pacing again. "Mr. Callahan," Harold Finch called from the office doorway. "Why don't you come inside and warm up? I've got coffee on the stove." "I'm fine," Jonah said. "I'll wait out here." "Suit yourself. But that stage ain't coming any faster just because you're standing in the cold." Jonah knew the old man was right, but he couldn't bring himself to move. What if the stage arrived while he was inside? What if Eliza stepped off and found no one waiting for her? What would she think? At 1:30, Tommy tugged at his sleeve. "Pa, I'm cold." Jonah looked down at his son, saw the boy's red nose and chattering teeth, and felt a stab of guilt. "Go inside with Mr. Finch," he said. "I'll call you when the stage comes. But go on now. I won't let you miss it." Tommy hesitated, then nodded and trudged toward the office. Jonah watched him go, then turned his gaze back to the road. The snow had begun to fall again, soft, lazy flakes that drifted down from a sky the color of iron. In the distance, the mountains were shrouded in mist, their peaks invisible. The road stretched east toward the passes, empty and white and utterly still. Come on, Jonah thought. Come on, Eliza. Where are you? The stage arrived at 3 o'clock. Jonah heard it before he saw it. The distant thunder of hooves, the creak of wheels, the driver's shouts urging the horses forward. His heart leaped into his throat as he stepped to the edge of the platform, straining his eyes against the falling snow. And then he saw it. The stagecoach emerged from the white curtain like a ghost, its red paint faded and streaked with mud. The horses were lathered, their breath steaming in the cold air. The driver, an old man Jonah recognized as Bill Dawson, hauled on the reins and brought the vehicle to a shuddering stop. Jonah didn't wait for the wheels to stop turning. He was at the coach door in 3 strides, his hand reaching for the handle. "Easy there, Callahan," Bill called down from the driver's seat. "Let 'em catch their breath." Jonah ignored him and pulled open the door. The coach was empty. For a moment he simply stood there, staring at the vacant seats, the crumpled blankets, the scattered luggage. His mind refused to process what his eyes were telling him. "Where are the passengers?" he heard himself ask. Bill climbed down from his seat, moving slowly, his old bones stiff from the long ride. His face was grim, his eyes shadowed. "There were passengers," he said. 6 of them when we left Denver. But the pass," he shook his head. "The pass collapsed, Mr. Callahan. Avalanche. Took out half the road." The world seemed to tilt beneath Jonah's feet. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we got hit hard about 20 miles east of here. Snow came down like the wrath of God. Buried the road. Spooked the horses. We lost a wheel trying to get through, had to abandon the coach and make for the nearest way station. The passengers, Jonah pressed. What happened to the passengers? Bill's expression grew even more troubled. Most of them made it to the station with me. A few went back to Denver with another driver. He paused. But there was one, a young woman, brown hair, traveling alone. She wouldn't wait. Jonah's blood turned to ice. What do you mean she wouldn't wait? I mean, she was determined to get to Salida. Said she had someone waiting for her, someone who was counting on her. I told her it was suicide to go on foot in that weather, but she wouldn't listen. Bill met Jonah's eyes. She set out alone, Mr. Callahan. That was 2 days ago. The words hit Jonah like a physical blow. 2 days. Eliza had been out there, alone in the wilderness, for 2 days. Which direction? He demanded. West, toward the pass, but Callahan, you can't. Jonah was already moving. He pushed past Bill, past the gathering crowd of townspeople, past Harold Finch, who was shouting something he couldn't hear. His mind was a roar of white noise, his heart a drumbeat of pure primal terror. Tommy appeared in front of him, his small face pale with confusion. Pa? What's happening? Where's the lady? Jonah knelt down and gripped his son's shoulders. Tommy, listen to me. Miss Ward is in trouble. She's out there in the mountains and I have to go find her. But the storm. I know it's dangerous, but I can't leave her out there, son. Do you understand? I can't. Tommy's eyes were wide, but he nodded slowly. You have to save her. Yes, I do. Jonah pulled the boy into a fierce hug. I need you to stay with Mrs. Patterson. Can you do that for me? Can you be brave? I can be brave, Tommy whispered. Jonah held him for one more moment, memorizing the feel of his small body, the smell of his hair. Then he let go and stood. Mr. Callahan. Harold Finch was hurrying toward him, his face flushed with alarm. You can't be serious. That storm's only getting worse. You'll never make it through the pass. Then I'll die trying, Jonah said, and he meant it. Within the hour, Jonah had saddled his strongest horse, a gray stallion named Thunder who had never once failed him, and gathered what supplies he could carry. Blankets, rope, a lantern, dried meat, a flask of whiskey, matches, his rifle. He knew it wasn't enough. He knew that what he was about to attempt was madness. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Eliza's letter. I am not afraid of the unknown, Mr. Callahan. I am only afraid of never taking the chance. She had risked everything to come to him. She had left behind her entire life, traveled thousands of miles, faced dangers she couldn't have imagined, all because she believed in the possibility of love with a man she'd never met. How could he do any less? Jonah! He turned to find Samuel standing beside his horse, his old friend's face etched with worry. You don't have to do this, Samuel said quietly. She made her choice. She knew the risks. And I'm making mine. You have a son, Jonah. What happens to Tommy if you don't come back? The question cut deep, but Jonah didn't waver. If I don't go, what kind of man am I? What kind of father? What do I teach Tommy about honor, about courage, about keeping your word? He shook his head. I can't live with myself if I let her die out there, Samuel. I can't. Samuel was silent for a long moment. Then he reached out and clasped Jonah's hand. Then ride fast, he said, and come back alive. Jonah nodded once, then swung into the saddle. He looked down at the small crowd that had gathered, the townspeople who thought he was crazy, the friends who feared for his life, the son who watched him with eyes too old for his young face. I'll bring her home, Jonah said. Then he turned Thunder toward the mountains and rode into the storm. The first few miles were almost easy. The road was still visible beneath the snow, and Thunder moved with sure-footed confidence through the drifts. The wind was brutal, cutting through Jonah's coat like a knife, but he hunched low in the saddle and pressed on. As the afternoon wore into evening, conditions deteriorated rapidly. The snow fell harder, driven by gusts that seemed to come from every direction at once. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Jonah could barely see Thunder's ears, let alone the road ahead. He pressed on. The temperature plummeted as night approached. Jonah's fingers grew numb inside his gloves. His face burned from the cold. Ice formed on his eyebrows, his beard, the brim of his hat. He pressed on. By midnight, he had traveled perhaps 15 miles. The pass was still ahead, somewhere in the darkness. Eliza was out there, somewhere in that frozen hell, and every minute that passed was a minute closer to her death. "Come on, boy," Jonah urged Thunder. "Just a little further." The horse snorted and pushed forward, his great muscles straining against the snow. They climbed higher into the mountains, following the stage road as best they could, and then, without warning, the road disappeared. Jonah pulled Thunder to a halt and stared at the wall of snow before him. The avalanche Bill had described was worse than he'd imagined. A massive slide that had buried the road under 20 feet of debris. There was no way through, no way around. For a moment, despair threatened to overwhelm him. He had come so far. He had risked everything. And now, faced with this impassable barrier, he felt the first stirrings of defeat. No. Jonah gritted his teeth and forced the despair down. There had to be another way. There was always another way. He dismounted and studied the terrain. To the north, the mountain rose in a sheer cliff, impassable. But to the south, the slope was gentler, dotted with pine trees that might provide some shelter from the wind. If he could find a way around the slide, through the forest, over the ridge, he might be able to reach the other side of the pass. It was a desperate plan. The forest would be treacherous in this weather, full of hidden crevices and unstable snow. One wrong step could send him tumbling into a ravine. One wrong turn could leave him hopelessly lost. But what choice did he have? "This way, boy," Jonah said, leading Thunder into the trees. The forest was a nightmare. Snow hung heavy on the branches, creating a canopy that blocked what little light remained. Jonah moved slowly, testing each step before putting his full weight down. Thunder followed close behind, the horse's breath warm against Jonah's back. They climbed for what felt like hours. The slope grew steeper, the snow deeper. Jonah's legs burned with exhaustion. His lungs ached from the cold air. More than once he stumbled and fell, his body screaming for rest. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Near dawn, he found a small cave, little more than an overhang of rock, really, and decided to rest for a few hours. He was no good to Eliza if he collapsed from exhaustion. He needed to conserve his strength for the search ahead. He led Thunder into the shelter and tied the horse to a root. Then he gathered what dry wood he could find and built a small fire, careful to keep the flames low so they wouldn't be visible from a distance. The last thing he needed was to attract wolves or mountain lions. As the fire crackled to life, Jonah sat with his back against the rock and pulled out Eliza's letter. He read it again by firelight, his lips moving silently over the words. "I hope, I pray, that when we meet, you will not be disappointed in the woman who wrote back." "I could never be disappointed in you," Jonah whispered to the empty air. "Just stay alive, please, Eliza. Just stay alive." He closed his eyes and let exhaustion pull him under. But he woke to silence. The storm had passed. The wind had died. The world outside the cave was still and white and blindingly bright. Jonah scrambled to his feet and stepped outside. The sun was climbing over the eastern peaks, its light glittering on the snow like a million scattered diamonds. The sky was a deep, impossible blue. It was beautiful. It was terrible. Because with the storm gone, Jonah could see just how vast the wilderness was. How many miles of frozen emptiness lay between him and the woman he was searching for. But he could also see something else. Tracks. They were faint, almost invisible, already half buried by the night's snowfall. But they were there. A line of footprints leading west, toward the pass. Jonah's heart stopped. Those were human footprints. Small, made by someone wearing inadequate boots, someone who had been stumbling, struggling, fighting for every step. Eliza. He ran back to the cave, saddled Thunder in record time, and followed the tracks. The trail led him down from the ridge and back toward the stage road. The footprints grew more erratic as they went, longer spaces between steps, deeper impressions where their maker had fallen and struggled to rise. Jonah pushed Thunder harder, his eyes fixed on the tracks, his heart pounding with desperate hope. The sun climbed higher. The morning wore on. The tracks led him through a narrow canyon, across a frozen creek, up a gentle slope dotted with aspens. And then, At the crest of the slope, he saw her. She was lying in the snow, curled into a ball, utterly still. Her dress, once blue perhaps, was white with frost. Her hair had come loose from its pins and lay scattered around her head like a dark halo. Her skin was pale, so pale it was almost the same color as the snow. For one terrible moment, Jonah was certain she was dead. He threw himself from the saddle and ran to her, his boots crunching through the crust of ice. He fell to his knees beside her, his hands trembling as he reached for her face. "Eliza," he breathed. "Eliza, please." Her skin was cold, so cold. But beneath his fingers, he felt something, a faint pulse, a whisper of life. And then her eyelids fluttered. Her lips moved, cracked and blue, forming a single word. Jonah. The sound of his name on her lips broke something inside him. Tears streamed down his face, freezing on his cheeks, as he gathered her into his arms. "I'm here," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm here, Eliza. I found you. You're safe now." Her eyes opened. Hazel, just like she'd written, but glazed with cold and exhaustion. She looked up at him, and despite everything, despite the frostbite and the hypothermia and the 2 days of hell she'd endured, she smiled. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. "I knew. You wouldn't let me die alone." "You're not going to die," Jonah said fiercely. "Do you hear me? You're not going to die. I won't allow it." Her eyes fluttered closed. Her body went limp in his arms. But she was breathing. She was alive. And Jonah Callahan made a vow in that moment, kneeling in the snow with the woman he loved cradled against his chest. He would carry her through fire and ice and the very gates of hell, if he had to. He would bring her home. The nearest shelter was an abandoned cowhand shack about 3 miles to the south. Jonah remembered it from his cattle drives, a small rickety structure that had been used by ranch hands before the range wars pushed everyone out of the territory. It wasn't much, but it was something. He wrapped Eliza in every blanket he had, lifted her onto Thunder's back, and led the horse through the snow. The journey was agonizing. Every minute felt like an hour. Every stumble sent his heart into his throat. Eliza drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes murmuring words he couldn't understand, sometimes crying out in fear. "Easy," Jonah soothed, his voice steady even as his insides churned with terror. "Easy, Eliza. We're almost there. Just hold on." When they finally reached the shack, Jonah nearly wept with relief. The door was hanging off its hinges, and the roof had partially collapsed, but the walls were intact and there was a small fireplace in the corner. It would do. It would have to. He carried Eliza inside and laid her on the floor. Then he worked faster than he'd ever worked in his life, gathering wood, building a fire, melting snow for water. The flames caught and grew, casting flickering shadows across the walls. As warmth began to fill the room, Jonah turned his attention to Eliza. Her condition was worse than he'd realized. Her fingers were white with frostbite. Her clothes were soaked through with melted snow. Her breathing was shallow, her pulse weak. She needed dry clothes. She needed warmth. Jonah hesitated, his face flushing despite the cold. He was a gentleman. He had been raised to treat women with respect, to never take liberties, to always maintain propriety, but propriety wouldn't save her life. "Forgive me," he whispered. He turned away. He couldn't bear to look, and began to help her out of her frozen garments. His hands were clumsy, his fingers numb, but he worked as gently as he could. When she was free of the wet clothes, he wrapped her in his own dry shirt, then piled every blanket he had around her. Only then did he allow himself to breathe. For hours, Jonah sat beside her, feeding the fire, watching her face for any sign of change. He talked to her, even though she couldn't hear him, told her about his ranch, about Tommy, about the blue curtains he'd hung in the window. He told her about the mountains in spring, when the wildflowers bloomed in carpets of purple and gold. He told her about his dreams for the future, the life he wanted to build with her. "You're going to love it here," he said, his voice hoarse. "It's not Boston. It's not fancy or civilized, but it's home, Eliza. It can be our home." She didn't respond, but her breathing grew stronger. The color began to return to her cheeks, and as the afternoon sun slanted through the broken window, her eyes finally opened. "Jonah?" Her voice was barely a whisper. He was at her side in an instant, taking her hand in his. I'm here. I'm right here. She blinked, confusion clouding her features. Where are we? A cabin in the mountains. You're safe now. She tried to sit up, then winced and fell back. My hands. I can't feel my hands. Frostbite, Jonah said. It's bad, but not hopeless. The doctor in town can help. We just need to get you there. Eliza closed her eyes, and for a moment, Jonah feared she'd slipped back into unconsciousness. But then she spoke, her voice barely audible. I'm sorry. Sorry? For what? For making you come after me. For putting you in danger. A tear slid down her cheek. I should have waited. I should have listened to the driver. But I couldn't bear the thought of disappointing you, of making you wait. Jonah shook his head fiercely. You could never disappoint me, Eliza. Never. Do you understand? You walked through hell to get to me. That's not disappointment. That's... He struggled to find the words. That's the bravest thing anyone's ever done for me. She opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. Her gaze traveled over his face, taking in the lines around his eyes, the gray in his beard, the worry etched into his features. You're not what I expected, she said softly. Jonah's heart clenched. I know I'm not much to look at. I'm older than my letters probably made me sound, and You're exactly what I needed, she interrupted. You're real, Jonah. After all those months of letters, all those words on paper, you're finally real. She squeezed his hand. And you came for me. You rode into a blizzard to find a woman you'd never even met. I had to, Jonah said simply. You were mine to protect. I'm not yours yet. We're not married. No, Jonah agreed. But we will be. If you'll still have me. Eliza's lips curved into a smile, weak, exhausted, but genuine. Ask me again when I can feel my fingers. Despite everything, Jonah laughed. Deal. That night, as the fire crackled and the wind moaned outside the walls, they talked. They talked about everything, their hopes, their fears, their pasts, their dreams. Eliza told him about Boston, about the gray skies and crowded streets, and the factory where she'd worked 12-hour days just to afford a room in a boarding house. She told him about her parents, about the cholera epidemic that had taken them, about the loneliness that had followed. Your letters saved me, she admitted. I was ready to give up. I had nothing to live for. And then your advertisement appeared in the Gazette, and I thought, why not? Why not take a chance on something impossible? I'm glad you did, Jonah said. So am I, even after all this. She gestured weakly at her bandaged hands, her frost-damaged face. Even after everything, I'm glad. Jonah told her about his own past, about Catherine, about the fever that had taken her, about the years of grief that had followed. He told her about Tommy, about the boy's nightmares, about his fear that he wasn't enough for his son. You're more than enough, Eliza said. I can tell, just from the way you talk about him. He's lucky to have you. He needs a mother. Is that why you sent for me? To give him a mother? Jonah was quiet for a moment, then he shook his head. At first, maybe, but then I started reading your letters, and he trailed off, struggling to articulate what he felt. It wasn't about Tommy anymore. It was about you, about the way you made me feel, about the possibility of something I thought I'd never have again. And what's that? Love. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Eliza's eyes glistened. I think I might love you too, she whispered. Is that crazy? We've known each other for months through letters, but we've only just met. Maybe it is crazy, Jonah said, but I don't care. I stopped caring about what's sensible the moment I rode into that blizzard. Eliza laughed softly. We make quite a pair, don't we? Two fools chasing an impossible dream. Maybe, but I'd rather be a fool with you than sensible without you. She reached out, painfully, carefully, and touched his face. Her fingers were still cold, still numb, but the gesture was tender. Then let's be fools together, she said. But the next morning, Jonah carried Eliza out of the cabin and set her on Thunder's back. The sky was clear, the sun was bright, and for the first time in days, hope burned in his chest. Ready? he asked. Eliza nodded, her arms wrapped around his waist. Take me home, Jonah. And so he did. The journey back to Salida took most of the day. Jonah moved carefully, avoiding the worst of the drifts, stopping frequently to check on Eliza. She was weak, exhausted, still recovering from her ordeal, but she was alive. She was alive, and she was his. As they crested the final ridge and saw the town spread out below them, smoke rising from chimneys, lights glowing in windows, people moving through the streets, Eliza gasped. It's beautiful, she breathed. Jonah smiled. Welcome to Salida. Welcome home. They rode down into town as the sun began to set, painting the snow in shades of orange and gold. Word spread quickly, and by the time they reached the main street, a crowd had gathered. Jonah saw Samuel first, his old friend's face breaking into a grin of relief. He saw Mrs. Patterson clutching her handkerchief. He saw Harold Finch and Bill Dawson and a dozen others whose names he couldn't remember. And then he saw Tommy. The boy broke free from Mrs. Patterson's grasp and ran toward them, his face alight with joy. Pa! Pa! You're back! Jonah dismounted and caught Tommy in his arms, lifting him off the ground. I'm back, son. I'm back. Did you find her? Did you find Miss Ward? Jonah turned and helped Eliza down from the horse. She was pale, trembling, barely able to stand, but she smiled when she saw Tommy. Hello, she said softly. You must be Tommy. Your father has told me so much about you. Tommy stared at her with wide eyes. Then, without warning, he threw his arms around her waist. Thank you for coming, he said. Thank you for not giving up. Eliza looked at Jonah over the boy's head, her eyes bright with tears. I could never give up, she said. Not when I had so much to come home to. The town doctor examined Eliza that evening and declared that while her frostbite was severe, she would recover with time and proper care. Her fingers would be scarred, he warned, but she would keep them all. She's lucky, the doctor said. Another few hours in that cold, and we'd be having a very different conversation. Jonah nodded, his throat tight. I know. You did a good thing, Callahan. A brave thing. I did what I had to do. The doctor smiled. That's what brave men always say. Over the following days, Eliza recovered at the boarding house, and Jonah visited her every day. They talked for hours, sometimes about serious things, sometimes about nothing at all. They learned each other's habits, their quirks, their preferences. They discovered shared jokes, private smiles, the countless small intimacies that build a relationship. Tommy visited too, bringing Eliza drawings he'd made and stories about his horse and questions about Boston. Eliza answered every question with patience and warmth, treating the boy not as an obligation but as a gift. She's good with him, Samuel observed one evening, watching through the window as Eliza and Tommy played a card game. Really good. I know, Jonah said. It's like she was meant to be here. Maybe she was. Maybe that's what fate looks like. A woman walking through a blizzard to find a man who'd ride into one to save her. Jonah considered this. That's pretty poetic for you, Samuel. I have my moments. Shet. 2 weeks after her rescue, Eliza walked down the aisle of Salida's small church. She wore a simple cream gown that the town's women had sewn for her, working through the nights to finish it in time. Her hair was pinned up with wildflowers, dried ones, saved from summer, and her scarred hands clutched a bouquet of evergreen boughs. She was the most beautiful thing Jonah had ever seen. He stood at the altar, trembling as she walked toward him. His heart was so full it ached. His eyes burned with tears he refused to shed. And when she reached him, when she took his hand and looked into his eyes, he knew, with absolute unshakable certainty, that this was exactly where he was meant to be. The preacher spoke the words. They made their vows. And when it was time for Jonah to say something, he leaned close and whispered so only she could hear, You weren't late, Eliza. You arrived exactly when my life needed you. Eliza's eyes filled with tears. She squeezed his hand, unable to speak. And then they were married. After the ceremony, as the townspeople gathered for the celebration, Tommy approached Eliza with a shy expression on his face. Mrs. Callahan? Eliza knelt down to his level. Yes, Tommy? The boy fidgeted, his eyes darting to his father, then back to her. Can I call you Ma? The question hung in the air. Jonah held his breath. And Eliza, the mail-order bride who had walked through hell to find her family, the woman who had risked everything on the promise of love, began to cry. "Yes," she said, pulling Tommy into her arms. "Yes, you can call me Ma." That night, as Salida slept under a blanket of fresh snow, Jonah and Eliza stood on the porch of their ranch house, looking out at the mountains. The peaks were silver in the moonlight, majestic and eternal. The sky was full of stars, more stars than Eliza had ever seen in Boston, more stars than she'd ever dreamed existed. "It's so beautiful," she breathed. "You're beautiful," Jonah said. She smiled and leaned against him. Flatterer. Truth-teller. They stood in comfortable silence for a long moment. Then Eliza spoke, her voice soft. "What if I had died out there? What if you hadn't found me in time?" Jonah considered the question. "Then I would have kept searching until I died too." "That's not romantic. That's tragic." "Maybe, but it's honest." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I meant what I said in my vows, Eliza. You weren't late. You arrived exactly when my life needed you. I was lost, and you found me. I was empty, and you filled me. I was broken, and you—" He paused, searching for the right words. "You didn't fix me, but you made me believe I could be whole again." Eliza's eyes shone with tears. "Jonah?" "I love you," he said simply. "I loved you before I ever met you, and I'll love you until the day I die." She rose on her toes and kissed him, softly, tenderly, a promise sealed. "I love you too," she whispered against his lips. "My cowboy, my hero, my home." And there, under the vast Colorado sky, with the mountains standing witness and the snow falling softly around them, Jonah Callahan and Eliza Ward began their life together. It would not be easy. There would be hard winters and dry summers, sick cattle and broken fences, arguments and misunderstandings, and all the small struggles that make up a marriage. But there would also be laughter. There would be joy. There would be Tommy growing tall and strong, calling Eliza Ma, with such ease that it seemed impossible there had ever been a time when she wasn't his mother. There would be love. And in the end, that was all that mattered. This was the story of how a mail-order bride never arrived, and how a cowboy rode through hell to find her. It was a story of courage, of faith, of the impossible power of love. But this is only the beginning. The long night in the cabin, where Jonah and Eliza first bared their souls to each other, that story has yet to be fully told. The healing that followed, the challenges they faced, the family they built, all of that lies ahead. For now, let us leave them on that porch, wrapped in each other's arms, looking out at a future that once seemed impossible, a future they fought for, a future they earned, a future they would face together, no matter what storms lay ahead. The warmth from the fireplace spread slowly through the abandoned cabin, pushing back the deadly cold that had seeped into every corner. Outside, the wind had died down to a whisper, but Jonah knew better than to trust the mountain weather. Storms in these parts could return without warning, turning a peaceful night into a frozen nightmare within minutes. He added another log to the fire and watched the flames dance higher, casting orange shadows across the rough wooden walls. The cabin creaked and groaned around them, protesting against the weight of snow on its damaged roof. It wasn't much, just 4 walls, a partial ceiling, and a stone fireplace that some long-forgotten cowhand had built decades ago. But tonight, it was the difference between life and death. Jonah turned to look at Eliza, wrapped in every blanket he had, her small form barely visible beneath the layers of wool and canvas. Her breathing had steadied over the past hour, no longer the shallow, frightening gasps that had made his heart stop when he first found her in the snow. Color was returning to her cheeks, not the healthy pink of warmth, but at least something other than the deathly white that had terrified him. She was awake now, her hazel eyes following him as he moved around the cabin, gathering what little remained of his supplies. "You should rest," Jonah said, settling onto the floor beside her. "Your body needs time to recover." "I've been resting," Eliza replied, her voice still weak but stronger than before. 2 days of walking through snow and then lying in a drift waiting to die. I think I've had enough rest." Despite the gravity of their situation, Jonah felt a smile tug at his lips. "You have a stubborn streak, don't you?" "My mother always said it would either save me or kill me." Eliza attempted a smile of her own, though it came out more like a grimace. "I suppose the jury's still out on which?" Jonah reached over and adjusted the blankets around her shoulders, his rough hands gentle. "The jury's not out. You're alive. That's the verdict." Eliza was quiet for a moment, studying his face in the firelight. She had imagined this moment so many times during the long months of correspondence, the moment when she would finally see the man behind the letters. She had pictured meeting him at the stage depot, perhaps, both of them nervous and awkward, trying to reconcile the intimate words they had shared with the strangers standing before each other. She had never imagined this, never imagined lying half-frozen in a crumbling cabin, wearing his shirt, watching him tend a fire like her life depended on it, because it did. "Tell me something," she said suddenly. Jonah looked up. "What do you want to know?" "Anything, everything." She shifted slightly, wincing as sensation began to return to her extremities. "I feel like I know you so well from your letters, but I also feel like I don't know you at all. Does that make sense?" "It makes perfect sense," Jonah said. He settled back against the wall, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "What do you want me to tell you? Tell me about the day you decided to place the advertisement, the real story, not the polished version you might tell strangers." Jonah was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough with memory. "It was a Sunday. Tommy was at church with Mrs. Patterson. She takes him sometimes when I have work to do on the ranch. I was supposed to be mending fences, but I couldn't make myself get started. I just sat on the porch, staring at the mountains, feeling this emptiness." He paused, struggling to find the right words. Catherine had been gone for 6 years by then. 6 years of raising Tommy alone, of working sunrise to sunset, of falling into bed exhausted, only to wake up reaching for someone who wasn't there. I thought I'd made my peace with it. I thought I'd accepted that I would spend the rest of my life alone. "But you hadn't," Eliza said softly. "No, I hadn't." Jonah ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Eliza was beginning to recognize as a sign of emotional discomfort. "That morning, I watched the sun come up over the peaks, and I thought about all the sunrises I'd see before I died. Thousands of them, maybe. All of them alone. That sounds unbearably sad." "It was. It is." He turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Samuel found me still sitting there at noon. He'd come to help with the fences, and instead he found me looking like I'd lost my best friend. He asked what was wrong, and I told him the truth, that I was tired. Not physically tired, but tired in my soul. Tired of having no one to share things with. Tired of watching Tommy grow up without a mother. Tired of going through the motions of living without actually feeling alive." Eliza reached out from beneath the blankets and found his hand. Her fingers were still cold, still numb, but she needed to touch him. Needed to let him know she was listening, that his words mattered. "Samuel was the one who suggested the advertisement," Jonah continued. "I laughed at him at first. Mail-order brides were for desperate men, I said. For men who couldn't find wives any other way. Samuel pointed out that I was desperate, whether I wanted to admit it or not. And he was right. So you placed the advertisement." So I placed the advertisement. I wrote it that same night, by candlelight, feeling like a fool the entire time. I almost didn't send it. I had the envelope sealed and ready to go, and I stood at the post office for 10 minutes, trying to convince myself not to be ridiculous. "But you sent it anyway." "I sent it anyway." Jonah squeezed her hand gently. "And then I waited." Weeks went by with no response. I started to think Samuel had been wrong, that no woman in her right mind would answer an advertisement from a widower rancher in the middle of nowhere, Colorado. But I did. "But you did." His voice softened. "When your first letter arrived, I couldn't believe it. I read it 3 times before I was convinced it was real, and then I read it 3 more times just because I wanted to." Eliza smiled, a real smile this time. "I was terrified when I sent that letter. I must have rewritten it a dozen times. I kept thinking I sounded too eager or too desperate or not interesting enough. I was sure you'd read it and throw it away." "I would never have thrown it away," Jonah said firmly. From the very first line, I knew you were different, special. How could you know that from a letter? Because you were honest. You didn't try to make yourself sound perfect. You told me about your life, the hard parts, the lonely parts, the parts that most people try to hide. You were real, Eliza. In a world full of pretense and politeness, you were real. Eliza felt tears prick at her eyes. She had spent so long trying to be what others expected, a dutiful daughter, a hard-working seamstress, a respectable woman who didn't cause trouble or draw attention. Writing to Jonah had been the first time she'd allowed herself to be truly honest, and she had been terrified that her honesty would drive him away. Instead, it had drawn him closer. I was so afraid, she admitted, not of the journey or the mountains or even the idea of marrying a stranger. I was afraid that when you met me, the real me, not just the words on paper, you would be disappointed. I could never be disappointed in you, Jonah said. You don't know that. You've only just met me. I know enough? He turned to face her fully, his expression intense. I know that you walked through a blizzard rather than disappoint a man you'd never met. I know that you left behind everything familiar, your home, your city, your entire life, because you believed in the possibility of something better. I know that when most people would have given up, you kept going. I almost didn't keep going, Eliza confessed. There were moments, so many moments, when I wanted to stop. When the cold was so bad I couldn't feel my legs, and the snow was so thick I couldn't see 3 feet in front of me. I thought about just lying down and letting it end. But you didn't. No, I didn't. She met his eyes. Because I kept thinking about you, about your letters, about the life you described, the mountains and the ranch and Tommy. I thought about how far I'd come and how much it would mean to finally reach you, and I couldn't bear the thought of dying without at least trying. Jonah was silent for a moment, overwhelmed by her words. He had never felt so humbled, so unworthy of the faith she had placed in him. I don't deserve you, he said quietly. That's not true. It is. You risked your life for me, Eliza. You walked through hell because you believed I was worth it. How can I ever live up to that? Eliza pulled herself up slightly, ignoring the protest of her exhausted body. She reached out and touched his face, her cold fingers tracing the line of his jaw. You already have, she said. You rode into a blizzard to find me. You left your son, your home, everything safe and warm, because you couldn't bear the thought of me dying alone. That's not the action of a man who doesn't deserve love, Jonah. That's the action of a man who understands it. Jonah closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. When he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. I was so afraid I wouldn't find you in time, he admitted. When the stage came empty, when they told me you'd left on foot, I've never felt fear like that. Not even when Catherine was sick. Because with Catherine, I was there. I could hold her hand, talk to her, be with her at the end. But with you, you were out there somewhere, alone and freezing, and I didn't even know where to look. But you found me. I found you. His voice broke slightly. Lying in the snow, so still I thought you were dead. And then you opened your eyes and said my name, and I thought my heart would stop from relief. Eliza smiled through her own tears. I dreamed about you, while I was lying there, waiting. I dreamed that you came for me, that you lifted me up out of the snow and carried me somewhere warm, and then I woke up and it wasn't a dream. It wasn't a dream, Jonah confirmed. It's real. We're real. We're real, Eliza echoed. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the fire crackle and the wind whisper outside. The cabin had warmed considerably, and Eliza felt her body beginning to relax for the first time in days. The terror of the journey, the desperate struggle for survival, all of it was fading, replaced by a profound sense of peace. She was safe, she was warm, and she was with the man she had traveled so far to find. Tell me about Tommy, she said eventually. Tell me everything. Jonah's face softened at the mention of his son. What do you want to know? Everything. What is he like? What makes him laugh? What scares him? I want to know who he is, not just what you've written in letters. Jonah considered for a moment, then began to speak. He's stubborn. Lord, is he stubborn? Gets it from his mother. Catherine was the most hard-headed woman I ever met, and Tommy inherited every ounce of it. When he decides he wants something, there's no talking him out of it. You just have to wait until he either gets it or gets tired of trying. That doesn't sound like it came only from his mother, Eliza observed. Jonah laughed, a real laugh, warm and genuine. You might be right about that. I suppose I'm not exactly known for my flexibility either. What else? He loves horses. Has since he was old enough to walk. His first word was horse, not mama or papa, but horse. Catherine was so disappointed. Jonah smiled at the memory. He spends every spare moment in the stable talking to the animals like they understand every word. And maybe they do. He has a way with them, gentle but firm. The horses trust him. He sounds wonderful. He is, but he's also... Jonah hesitated. He's struggled since Catherine died. He was so young, only 4. He doesn't remember her clearly, just impressions. The smell of her perfume, the sound of her voice. Sometimes he wakes up from dreams about her, and he can't tell me what she looked like in them. Just that she was there, and then she wasn't. Eliza's heart ached for the boy she hadn't yet met. That must be so hard for him. It is, and I haven't always known how to help. I'm not good at talking about feelings, at emotions. Catherine was the one who handled all of that. I just fix things, build things, work with my hands. But you can't fix grief. You can't build something that fills the empty space a mother leaves behind. Maybe not, Eliza said gently, but you can love him. You can be there for him. That counts for something. I hope so. Jonah's voice was heavy with doubt. Sometimes I worry I'm failing him, that he needed more than I could give, and I was too proud or too blind to see it. That's not true. From everything you've written, from the way you talk about him, you're a good father, Jonah. A wonderful father. I'm a trying father. That's about the best I can claim. Trying is enough. Trying is everything. Jonah looked at her with something approaching wonder. How do you do that? Do what? Say exactly what I need to hear, every time. Eliza smiled. Maybe because I need to hear it too. We're not so different, you and I, both of us stumbling through life, trying our best, afraid we're not good enough. But maybe that's what makes us right for each other. 2 imperfect people who can be imperfect together. Imperfect together, Jonah repeated. I like that. They lapsed into silence again, but this time it was a warmer silence. Something had shifted between them. A wall had come down. A barrier had been breached. They were no longer strangers exchanging letters across 1,000 miles. They were 2 people beginning to build something real. After a while, Eliza spoke again. Will you tell me about Catherine? Jonah stiffened slightly. What do you want to know? Whatever you want to tell me. I don't want to replace her, Jonah. I know she was your wife, the mother of your son. I want to understand. I want to know who she was, what she meant to you. For a long moment, Jonah didn't respond. Eliza wondered if she had pushed too far, asked for too much too soon. But then he began to speak, his voice quiet and rough with memory. We met when we were young, 17, both of us. Her father owned the general store in the town where I grew up, back in Missouri. I used to find excuses to go in there just so I could see her, bought more sugar than my family could ever use. My mother thought I'd lost my mind. That's sweet. It was pathetic, Jonah corrected, but he was smiling. She knew, of course. Women always know. She let me fumble and stammer for 3 months before she finally took pity on me and asked if I was ever going to court her properly. Or just keep buying sugar. Eliza laughed, imagining a younger Jonah, nervous and besotted. What did you say? I dropped the bag of sugar I was holding, 5 pounds, all over the floor. He shook his head at the memory. She laughed so hard she cried. And somehow, that was the moment I knew I was going to marry her. Because she laughed? Because she laughed without cruelty. A lot of people would have mocked me for being clumsy, for being foolish, but Catherine just thought it was funny. She saw the humor in the situation without seeing it as a reason to think less of me. Does that make sense? It makes perfect sense. We were married the next spring. Her father gave me a job at the store, and I worked there for 5 years, saving every penny. Then the stories started coming back from Colorado. Tales of cheap land, open ranges, opportunity for anyone willing to work hard enough. I asked Catherine if she wanted to try, and she said yes without hesitation. That was brave of her. That was Catherine. She was braver than me in a lot of ways. She was the one who suggested we buy this land, who convinced me we could make it work. When the first winter nearly killed our cattle, she was the one who refused to give up. When drought hit 2 years later, she found ways to stretch our supplies until the rain came back. Jonah's voice had taken on a distant quality, as if he were seeing the past more clearly than the present. She was my partner in everything, my best friend. When I was discouraged, she lifted me up. When I was proud, she kept me humble. When Tommy was born, I saw a whole different side of her, so tender, so patient. She was made to be a mother. She sounds wonderful. She was. Jonah's voice caught. She was everything good and strong and beautiful. And then one day she started coughing. Just a little cough, nothing serious. But it got worse. A fever came. The doctor from Denver made the trip out, but there was nothing he could do. 3 weeks from that first cough, she was gone. Eliza felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She didn't try to stop them. Tommy cried for days. He was too young to understand what death meant, but he knew his mother wasn't coming back. He kept asking where she was, when she was coming home. I didn't know what to tell him. What did you tell him? The truth, eventually. That she had gone somewhere we couldn't follow, that she loved him more than anything in the world, and that even though she couldn't be with us anymore, that love would never go away. Jonah's jaw tightened. I don't know if he understood. I don't know if I understood. All I knew was that the world had become a colder place, and I had to find a way to keep living in it. And you did. I did. But there was a part of me that died with her, a part I never expected to feel again. He turned to look at Eliza, his eyes bright with emotion, until your first letter arrived. Eliza's breath caught. Jonah, I'm not saying this to put pressure on you. I'm not expecting you to be Catherine or to fill the space she left. I just want you to know what your letters meant to me, what you meant to me, even before we met. You made me feel alive again, Eliza. You made me believe that maybe the best part of my life wasn't behind me. I felt the same way, Eliza whispered. Before your letters, I was just existing, going through the motions. Your words gave me something to hope for, someone to hope for. Then we saved each other, Jonah said simply. I suppose we did. They sat together as the fire burned lower, neither of them feeling the need to fill the silence with words. Outside, the wind had picked up again, howling around the corners of the cabin, but inside they were warm and safe, and together. Eventually, Eliza's eyes began to droop. The ordeal of the past 2 days was catching up with her, dragging her towards sleep despite her desire to keep talking. Rest, Jonah said, noticing her fatigue. We have a long ride tomorrow. Will you stay with me? I'm not going anywhere. Eliza smiled and let her eyes close. Within moments, her breathing had slowed to the steady rhythm of sleep. Jonah watched her for a long time, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the sweep of her lashes, the way her lips parted slightly as she breathed. She was here. She was real. After all the letters, all the waiting, all the fear and desperation of the past few days, she was finally here. He had found her in the snow, more dead than alive. He had carried her to this broken-down cabin and fought to keep her warm through the long, terrible night. And now, watching her sleep peacefully beside the fire, he knew with absolute certainty that he would do it all again, 1,000 times over. Because she was worth it. Because she was everything. The night deepened around them, stars emerging in the gaps where the roof had fallen away. Jonah added another log to the fire and settled back against the wall, close enough to feel the warmth of Eliza's body through the blankets. He didn't sleep. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her lying in the snow, frozen and still. The image would haunt him for the rest of his life, he knew. But so would this image, Eliza safe and warm, sleeping peacefully, trusting him to watch over her. It was, he realized, the happiest he had been in 6 years. As dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Eliza stirred, her eyes fluttered open, confused for a moment, then focusing on Jonah's face. You didn't sleep, she said. I wasn't tired. Liar, he smiled. Maybe a little. Eliza pushed herself up, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles. Her hands throbbed dully, the frostbite making itself known as sensation returned. But the pain felt distant, manageable. She was alive. That was what mattered. How far is it to town? She asked. Half a day's ride, if the weather holds. And if it doesn't? Then we stay here until it does. Jonah stood and began gathering their things. But I think we'll be all right. The sky's clearing. Eliza watched him move around the cabin, efficient and sure. There was a grace to him that she hadn't expected, a quiet competence that spoke of years spent surviving in this harsh landscape. He was not the rough, uncultured frontiersman she had half expected. He was something far more complex, far more wonderful. Jonah? He looked up. Thank you for coming for me, for not giving up. You don't have to thank me. Yes, I do. Most men wouldn't have done what you did. Most men would have waited for the weather to clear, or sent a search party, or just hoped for the best. You rode into a blizzard, you risked your life. That's not nothing. Jonah crossed the cabin and knelt before her, taking her bandaged hands gently in his. Listen to me, he said, his voice low and intense. From the moment I read your first letter, you became mine to protect, mine to care for, mine to love. I don't take that lightly, Eliza. I never will. So yes, I rode into a blizzard. Yes, I risked my life, and I would do it again without hesitation, because you're worth it. Do you understand? You're worth everything. Eliza stared at him, overwhelmed by the intensity of his words. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever made her feel so valued, so cherished. I understand, she whispered. Good. He stood, pulling her gently to her feet. Now, let's go home. Home. The word sent a thrill through her. She had left behind the only home she had ever known, the cramped apartment in Boston, the familiar streets, the gray skies that matched her gray existence. She had traveled across a continent on nothing more than faith and hope. And now, finally, she was going home. Jonah helped her onto Thunder's back, then swung up behind her. His arms came around her, holding her steady, and she leaned back against his chest, drawing comfort from his warmth. Ready? He asked. Ready. They rode out of the canyon as the sun crested the eastern peaks, painting the snow in shades of gold and rose. The world stretched out before them, vast and white and beautiful. Somewhere ahead lay Salida, with its wooden buildings and its curious townspeople, and a little boy waiting for his father to come home, waiting to meet the woman who would become his mother. Eliza thought about Tommy as they rode. She thought about the stories Jonah had told her, about the boy's love for horses and his stubborn streak and the mother-shaped hole in his heart. She thought about the challenge ahead, earning his trust, building a relationship, becoming a family. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever was. But as they descended from the mountains, as the town came into view in the distance, Eliza felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Pure, unshakable hope. The journey had been brutal. The night had been long. But dawn had come, as it always did, bringing with it the promise of new beginnings. And Eliza Ward, soon to be Eliza Callahan, was ready to begin. The descent from the mountains took longer than Jonah had hoped. The snow lay thick and treacherous on the lower slopes, and Thunder picked his way carefully through drifts that sometimes reached the horse's chest. Eliza clung to Jonah's waist, her body pressed against his back for warmth, her eyes taking in the landscape that would become her home. It was beautiful in a way Boston had never been. The peaks rose around them like ancient sentinels, their snow-capped summits gleaming in the morning sun. Pine forests blanketed the valleys, dark green against the white. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals, its cry echoing across the emptiness. "It's so quiet," Eliza murmured. "You get used to it," Jonah said. "After a while, you start to hear things you never noticed before. The wind in the trees, the creek running under the ice, the way the snow sounds when it falls from a branch. I don't know if I'll ever get used to it. In Boston, there was always noise. People shouting, carriages rattling, factory whistles blowing. The silence here feels enormous. Does it frighten you?" Eliza considered the question. "No," she said finally. "It feels like freedom." They rode on as the sun climbed higher, the temperature rising just enough to make the journey bearable. Around midday, they stopped beside a frozen creek to rest Thunder and share the last of Jonah's provisions. a few strips of dried beef and a handful of hardtack that had seen better days. Not exactly a feast, Jonah apologized, handing her a piece of the tough bread. It's perfect, Eliza said, and meant it. After 2 days of nothing, even hardtack tasted like heaven. As they ate, Jonah pointed out landmarks in the distance, a distinctive peak that marked the northern boundary of his property, a ridge where he sometimes hunted elk, a valley where the best grazing land lay waiting for spring. It's so much, Eliza said, overwhelmed. I had no idea your ranch was so large. It's not large by Colorado standards. Some of the cattle barons own tens of thousands of acres, but it's enough for us. Enough to build a good life. A good life, Eliza repeated softly. That's all I ever wanted. Jonah looked at her, really looked at her, taking in the exhaustion etched on her face, the bandages on her hands, the determined set of her jaw despite everything she had endured. You'll have it, he promised. I'll make sure of it. They mounted up again and continued the descent. By mid-afternoon, the terrain had flattened into rolling hills, and Eliza could see signs of civilization, a distant fence line, smoke rising from a chimney somewhere beyond the trees, the faint outline of buildings clustered together. Is that Salida? She asked. That's home. Her heart began to race. After everything, the months of letters, the long journey from Boston, the nightmare in the mountains, she was finally about to arrive at her destination. She was about to step into the new life she had dreamed of for so long, and she was terrified. Jonah, she said suddenly, what if they don't accept me? Who? The townspeople, your neighbors, everyone. She bit her lip nervously. I'm a stranger here, an outsider, a mail-order bride that everyone's been gossiping about. What if they think I'm not good enough? What if they think I'm just some desperate woman who tricked you into marriage? Jonah pulled Thunder to a stop and turned in the saddle to face her. Listen to me, he said firmly. The people of Salida are good people. Yes, they gossip. That's what small towns do. But they also take care of their own. And the moment you became mine, you became one of them. But I'm not yours yet. We're not married. We will be. And even if we weren't, you walked through a blizzard to get here. You nearly died trying to reach a town you'd never seen, to marry a man you'd never met. That's not desperation, Eliza. That's courage. Anyone who can't see that isn't worth worrying about. Eliza felt tears prick at her eyes. You really believe that? I know it. He reached back and squeezed her hand gently. Now stop worrying and let's go meet your new neighbors. They rode into Salida as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western peaks. The town was small but sturdy, a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a main street that had been packed down by countless wagons and horses. There was a general store, a saloon, a church with a modest steeple, a blacksmith's forge that sent sparks flying into the cold air, and there were people. Lots of people. Word had apparently spread that Jonah Callahan had ridden out to find his missing bride, and half the town had gathered to see if he would return successful. As Thunder carried them down the main street, faces appeared in windows. Doors opened. People stepped out onto porches, staring. Eliza felt her cheeks flush with self-consciousness. She was painfully aware of how she must look, her hair tangled and dirty, her dress ruined, her hands wrapped in makeshift bandages. Not exactly the picture of the refined Eastern lady they had probably been expecting. But then something unexpected happened. An old woman near the general store began to clap. Slowly at first, then faster. A man outside the saloon joined in. Then another, and another. Within moments, the entire street was applauding, cheering, calling out congratulations. Welcome to Salida. God bless you, miss. Jonah, you crazy fool, you actually did it. Eliza stared in disbelief, tears streaming down her face. These strangers, people she had never met, would never have known existed if not for a desperate gamble on love, were welcoming her like a hero. I told you, Jonah said softly, and she could hear the smile in his voice. You're one of us now. They stopped in front of a building marked Patterson Boarding House, where a crowd had gathered. Jonah dismounted first, then reached up to help Eliza down. Her legs were weak from the long ride, and she stumbled slightly as her feet touched the ground. Jonah caught her easily, his strong arms steadying her. Easy there, he murmured. I've got you. Pa? The cry cut through the noise of the crowd, and suddenly a small figure was pushing through the forest of legs, emerging into the clear space around them. Tommy Callahan, 10 years old and small for his age, with his mother's dark hair and his father's stubborn jaw, stopped short a few feet away. His eyes were fixed on Eliza. She saw the uncertainty there, the hope warring with fear. This boy had lost his mother 6 years ago. He had watched his father grieve, had felt the emptiness in their home, had wondered if things would ever feel whole again. And now here was a stranger, a woman from across the country, who might fill some of that emptiness, or who might disappear, like his mother had, who might be just another loss waiting to happen. Eliza understood all of this in a single glance. She saw herself in his eyes, saw the frightened, hopeful child she had once been, waiting for her parents to come home from the factory, never quite believing they would until they walked through the door. She knelt down slowly, ignoring the pain in her legs, until she was at his eye level. "Hello, Tommy," she said softly. "I'm Eliza. I've heard so much about you." Tommy didn't respond. His eyes darted to his father, then back to her. "Your pa told me you love horses," Eliza continued. "He said you can talk to them and they understand every word." Something flickered in the boy's expression. Interest, perhaps, or surprise that this stranger knew something so personal about him. "He also told me you're the stubbornest person he's ever met," Eliza added with a small smile. "And that you get it from your ma." Tommy's eyes widened. "He told you about Ma?" "He did. He told me she was brave and kind, and that she loved you more than anything in the world." Tears welled in the boy's eyes. His lower lip trembled. "I'm not trying to replace her," Eliza said gently. "No one could ever replace your ma. But I really hope, that maybe we can be friends. Would that be all right?" For a long moment, Tommy just stared at her. The crowd had gone quiet, everyone watching the exchange with bated breath. Jonas stood frozen, his heart in his throat, terrified of what his son might say. And then Tommy did something no one expected. He threw his arms around Eliza's neck and buried his face in her shoulder. "You came," he whispered. "You really came." Eliza held him close, tears streaming down her face. "I came," she said, "and I'm not going anywhere." Over the boy's head, she met Jonah's eyes. He was crying too, silently, without shame, tears cutting tracks through the dust on his weathered face. In that moment, she knew she had made the right choice. All the fear, all the uncertainty, all the pain of the journey, it was worth it. Every bit of it was worth it. The crowd erupted in cheers again, but Eliza barely heard them. All that mattered was the boy in her arms and the man standing behind him, watching her with an expression of pure, overwhelming love. She was home. The next few hours passed in a blur. The town doctor, a gruff older man named Harrison who had been practicing medicine in Salida for 20 years, examined Eliza thoroughly while a crowd of concerned women hovered outside the door. "Frostbite on the fingers and toes," he announced, peering at her hands through his spectacles. "Moderate, not severe. You're lucky, young lady. Another few hours in that cold and we'd be talking about amputation." Eliza shuddered at the thought. "Will I be able to use my hands normally?" "Give it time. The skin will peel, probably scar. You'll have some numbness, maybe permanent, maybe not. But you'll keep all your fingers, which is more than most folks can say after what you went through." "Thank you, doctor." "Don't thank me. Thank that fool of a man who rode into a blizzard to find you." Harrison shook his head, but there was grudging admiration in his eyes. "Jonah Callahan. I've known him for 15 years, and I've never seen him do anything half as crazy, or half as romantic." After the examination, Eliza was installed in the finest room the boarding house had to offer, a small but clean space with a real bed, a washstand, and windows that looked out over the main street. Mrs. Patterson, a formidable widow who ran the establishment with an iron fist and a surprisingly warm heart, personally oversaw the arrangements. "You'll stay here until you're well enough for the wedding," she declared, brooking no argument. "I've already spoken with Reverend Mills. He says he can perform the ceremony as soon as you're ready." "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Patterson, but I couldn't possibly impose." "Impose? Nonsense. After what you've been through, you deserve a proper recovery. And a proper wedding." The older woman's stern expression softened slightly. Besides, that boy needs a mother. Anyone can see it, and from what I witnessed today, you might just be the answer to his prayers. Eliza felt tears threaten again. She seemed to be doing a lot of crying lately. I'll try, she said. I'll try to be everything he needs. That's all any of us can do, dear. Try. As evening fell, a steady stream of visitors came to pay their respects. Eliza met so many people that their names began to blur together. The blacksmith and his wife, the owner of the general store, the school teacher, a dozen ranchers and their families. Each one brought a gift, a jar of preserves, a warm blanket, a handmade card from the school children. By the time the last visitor departed, Eliza was exhausted but deeply moved. She had expected suspicion, judgment, rejection. Instead, she had found warmth, generosity, and a genuine desire to welcome her into the community. They don't even know me, she said to Jonah, who had stayed by her side through all the introductions. Why are they being so kind? Because that's who they are, Jonah said simply. And because they know what it took for you to get here. Courage like that earns respect in these parts. I don't feel courageous. I feel like I barely survived. Sometimes that's the same thing. He sat beside her on the edge of the bed, careful not to jostle her healing hands. The lamp cast warm light across his features, softening the lines of worry and exhaustion that had been etched there since she'd arrived. How are you really feeling? He asked. Overwhelmed, grateful, terrified. She laughed softly. Sometimes all three at once. Terrified of what? Of everything. Of not being good enough for Tommy, of not being the wife you deserve, of waking up tomorrow and finding out this was all a dream. Jonah took her hands gently, mindful of the bandages. This isn't a dream, Eliza, and you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be here. That's all Tommy needs. That's all I need. What if I fail? Then we fail together, and then we try again. He met her eyes with unwavering certainty. That's what marriage is. That's what family is. Not perfection, but persistence. Not never falling, but always getting back up. Eliza stared at him, this man she had known for months through letters but had only truly met days ago. How was it possible to feel so connected to someone after such a short time? How was it possible to trust so completely? But she did trust him. Completely, unreservedly, with every fiber of her being. When can we be married? She asked. Jonah smiled, a real smile, the first she had seen since they arrived in town. Whenever you're ready, the Reverend is on standby. The whole town is ready to celebrate. Tomorrow seems too soon, but waiting seems impossible. Then we'll find a middle ground, a week, maybe. Enough time for you to recover, for us to make proper arrangements. He paused. Unless you want more time, to be sure. I'm sure, Eliza said without hesitation. I've been sure since your first letter. I'm not going to start doubting now. Then a week it is. He leaned in and kissed her forehead, a gentle, tender gesture that somehow felt more intimate than any passionate embrace. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with emotion. Get some rest, he said. You've earned it. Will I see you tomorrow? You'll see me every single day for the rest of our lives. He left then, closing the door softly behind him. Eliza listened to his footsteps recede down the hallway, then let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She was here. She had made it. Against all odds, against the mountains and the snow and the endless miles, she had reached her destination. And tomorrow, for the first time in her life, she would wake up in a place that felt like home. The week that followed was unlike anything Eliza had ever experienced. In Boston, she had been invisible, just another factory girl, another face in the crowd, another cog in the great industrial machine. Here in Salida, she was a celebrity. Everywhere she went, people stopped to greet her, to ask how she was feeling, to share their excitement about the upcoming wedding. The women of the town took her under their collective wing with an enthusiasm that was almost overwhelming. Mrs. Patterson organized a sewing circle that worked around the clock to create her wedding dress, a simple cream gown that was nonetheless the most beautiful thing Eliza had ever worn. The blacksmith's wife taught her how to make the hearty stews that were staples of frontier cooking. The school teacher, a young woman named Sarah, who had come west from Ohio 2 years ago, became her closest friend, sharing stories of her own adjustment to life in Colorado. It's not easy at first, Sarah admitted during one of their conversations. Everything is different, the food, the weather, the way people talk and think, but it grows on you. Before you know it, you can't imagine living anywhere else. Do you ever miss home? Eliza asked. Sometimes. I miss my mother, my sisters. I miss the green hills and the gentle rain, Sarah smiled. But I don't miss being told what to do, who to marry, how to live my life. Out here, I'm free. I teach the children. I make my own choices. I answer to no one but myself. That's worth a little homesickness. Eliza nodded, understanding completely. She had felt the same suffocation in Boston, the sense that her path had been laid out for her from birth, that deviation was not just discouraged but impossible. Coming west had been terrifying, but it had also been liberating. She was no longer Eliza Ward, factory seamstress, orphan, nobody. She was about to become Eliza Callahan, wife, mother, partner in a new adventure. The distinction felt monumental. Tommy visited her every day, usually with Jonah, but sometimes alone. At first he was shy, hovering in the doorway of her room as if afraid to enter. But gradually, over cups of hot chocolate and games of cards, he began to open up. He told her about his horse, a dappled mare named Starlight that he had helped birth 2 summers ago. He told her about school, where he was learning arithmetic and geography, and struggled with both. He told her about his dreams of one day owning his own ranch, bigger even than his father's, with 1,000 head of cattle and horses that people would come from miles around to buy. And one evening, when the setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, he told her about his mother. She used to sing to me, he said quietly, staring out the window. When I was scared of the dark or when the thunder came. She had this song. I don't remember the words anymore, just the tune. I try to hold on to it, but it keeps slipping away. Eliza felt her heart break for this boy who was trying so hard to hold on to memories that were fading like morning mist. Tell me about her, she said gently. What was she like? She was pretty, I think. I remember her smile. It made everything feel safe. Tommy's voice was barely above a whisper. Pa says I have her eyes. Is that true? Eliza looked at him, at the dark hair and the stubborn jaw, and the eyes that held too much loss for someone so young. I think you have her spirit, she said. Your pa told me she was brave and kind and never gave up no matter how hard things got. That sounds like someone I know. Tommy turned to look at her, surprise flickering across his face. You think I'm brave? I think you're one of the bravest people I've ever met. You lost your mother when you were just a little boy, and you've carried on. You've helped your pa, taken care of your responsibilities, kept hoping for better days. That takes courage, Tommy, real courage. He was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, the first real smile she had seen from him. I'm glad you came, he said. I was scared at first. Pa told me you were coming, and I didn't know what to think. I thought maybe you'd be mean, or you wouldn't like me, or you'd try to make me forget Ma. I would never try to make you forget her. Your Ma is part of who you are. She always will be. Pa said you'd say that. Tommy's smile widened. He said you were special. I think he was right. Eliza reached out and ruffled his hair, ignoring the twinge of pain in her healing fingers. I think you're pretty special yourself, Tommy Callahan. Does that mean... Can I... He hesitated, suddenly shy again. Can I call you something other than Miss Ward? What would you like to call me? He looked down at his feet, gathering courage. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. Could I call you Ma? Time seemed to stop. Eliza felt tears welling in her eyes, felt her throat tighten with emotion too big for words. Tommy, she managed to say. I would be honored. I would be so honored. He looked up, his own eyes glistening. Really? Really? She opened her arms and he fell into them, burying his face against her shoulder. I'm not going to try to replace the mother you lost, but I promise with everything I have that I will love you like my own. From this day forward, you are my son, my family, my heart. Tommy clung to her, his small body shaking with sobs that were equal parts grief and relief. Eliza held him tight, stroking his hair, murmuring words of comfort. In the doorway, unseen by either of them, Jonah stood with tears streaming down his face. He had hoped for this, prayed for it. But to see it actually happen, to watch his son finally begin to heal, to witness the bond forming between his child and the woman he loved, it was almost more than his heart could bear. He slipped away quietly, leaving them to their moment. There would be time later to express his gratitude, his love, his overwhelming joy. Right now, he just needed to be alone with his tears. The day of the wedding dawned clear and cold, the sky a brilliant blue that seemed to stretch forever in every direction. Eliza woke early, her stomach fluttering with nerves, her heart racing with anticipation. Today she would become Jonah's wife. Today she would officially become Tommy's mother. Today her new life would truly begin. Sarah arrived at sunrise to help her prepare, bringing with her a small army of women who seemed determined to make Eliza the most beautiful bride Salida had ever seen. They brushed her hair until it shone, pinned it up with flowers they had somehow preserved from last summer's garden. They helped her into the cream wedding dress, adjusting the hem, smoothing the fabric, exclaiming over how perfectly it fit. "You look beautiful," Sarah said, stepping back to admire her work. "Jonah won't know what hit him." Eliza studied herself in the small mirror, barely recognizing the woman who stared back. The exhausted, frost-damaged survivor who had arrived in town a week ago was gone. In her place stood a bride, nervous, hopeful, radiant with love. "I'm getting married," she whispered, testing the words on her tongue. "I'm actually getting married." "Nervous?" "Terrified." "Good," Sarah grinned. "That means you're taking it seriously." At noon, Eliza walked down the aisle of Salida's small church, her arm linked through Samuel's. Jonah's oldest friend had been honored when asked to give her away in place of the father she had lost. The pews were packed with townspeople, every seat filled, people standing along the walls for lack of space. Eliza saw Mrs. Patterson dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, saw the blacksmith and his wife holding hands, saw a dozen faces she had come to recognize over the past week. But she only truly saw one face. Jonah stood at the altar, dressed in his best suit, his hair neatly combed for once, his beard trimmed. His eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He was trembling. She could see it from here, the slight shake in his hands, the nervous bob of his throat as he swallowed. This strong, capable man who had ridden through a blizzard to save her was trembling at the sight of her walking toward him. In that moment, any remaining doubts Eliza might have harbored evaporated completely. This was right. This was meant to be. She reached the altar and took Jonah's hands in hers. His skin was warm, his grip strong and steady, despite his visible nerves. "You look beautiful," he whispered. "You look terrified," she whispered back. "I am. Terrified I'll wake up and find out this was all a dream." "It's not a dream, Jonah. I'm really here." "I know." His voice cracked. "That's what terrifies me most." Reverend Mills cleared his throat, beginning the ceremony. His words washed over Eliza like water, familiar from 1,000 weddings she had imagined but never thought she'd experience herself. She made her responses automatically, her voice steady despite the trembling in her chest. And then it was time for the vows. Jonah went first, his voice rough with emotion but clear enough for everyone to hear. "Eliza, I never thought I'd stand here again. After Catherine died, I thought that part of my life was over. I thought I'd spend my remaining years alone, raising Tommy as best I could, going through the motions of living without really feeling alive. Then your first letter arrived and everything changed. You gave me hope, Eliza. You gave me something to believe in. And when I thought I'd lost you, when I rode into that blizzard not knowing if I'd ever see you alive, I realized something I should have known from the start. You're my future. You're my second chance. You're the answer to prayers I didn't even know I was praying. I vow to love you, protect you, cherish you for as long as I draw breath. I vow to be patient when you need patience, strong when you need strength, gentle when you need gentleness. I vow to build a life with you, a real life full of joy and laughter, and yes, probably some tears too. Because that's what life is. It's messy and beautiful and terrifying and wonderful, and I can't imagine facing any of it without you by my side." Eliza was crying before he finished. She didn't try to hide it. When it was her turn to speak, she took a deep breath and looked into his eyes. Jonah, when I answered your advertisement, I didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew I couldn't stay where I was, trapped in a life that was slowly suffocating me, surrounded by people who didn't really see me, going nowhere. I took a chance on the impossible. I bet everything on a man I'd never met, based on nothing more than words on paper. Everyone thought I was crazy. Maybe I was. But then I started getting your letters, and in those letters, I found someone who understood me, really understood me, in a way no one ever had before. You saw past the surface, past the things I said to be polite or acceptable. You saw the real me, and you didn't run away. That night in the cabin, when we talked until dawn, when we shared our fears and hopes and dreams, that's when I knew. Not just that I loved you, but that I had always been meant to love you, that every hard road I'd walked had been leading me here, to this moment, to you. I vow to be your partner in all things, to share your burdens and multiply your joys, to love Tommy as my own son, to build him up, to give him the mother he deserves, to stand beside you through whatever storms may come, because I've already walked through the worst one I could imagine, and I survived because you came for me. You came for me, Jonah. When everyone else would have waited, would have played it safe, would have chosen self-preservation over love, you rode into hell to find me. How could I not spend the rest of my life loving a man like that? The Reverend pronounced them husband and wife. Jonah kissed her, softly at first, then deeper as the church erupted in cheers. Eliza wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, feeling for the first time in her life that she was exactly where she belonged. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Jonah whispered against her lips, "You weren't late, Eliza. You arrived exactly when my life needed you." She smiled through her tears. "I think you've said that before. I'll say it every day until you believe it. I believe it now." Tommy pushed through the crowd of well-wishers and threw himself at both of them, wrapping his small arms around their waists as far as they would reach. "Does this mean you're really my ma now?" he asked, looking up at Eliza with shining eyes. She knelt down and pulled him close. "Yes, Tommy, I'm really your ma now, forever and always." The boy buried his face in her shoulder, his small body shaking with happy sobs. Jonah put his arms around both of them, holding his family, his whole family, for the first time in 6 years. The celebration that followed was the largest Salida had ever seen. Tables were set up in the church hall, laden with food that the townspeople had been preparing for days. There was roasted beef and fresh bread, apple pie and spiced cider, more dishes than Eliza could name or count. Someone produced a fiddle, and soon the dancing began. Jonah led Eliza onto the floor, his movements stiff and self-conscious. He had warned her he wasn't much of a dancer, but she didn't care. She floated in his arms, lost in the music and the moment. "Happy?" he asked. "Deliriously," she replied. "Is that a word?" "It is now." Tommy claimed the next dance, standing on his father's shoes while Jonah guided them both around the floor. Eliza watched from the sidelines, her heart so full she thought it might burst. Mrs. Patterson appeared at her elbow. "How does it feel?" "Like a dream I don't want to wake up from." The older woman smiled. "You've earned this, dear. Both of you have. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." "I won't," Eliza promised. "I've come too far to start doubting now." As the evening wore on and the celebration showed no signs of slowing, Eliza slipped outside for a moment of quiet. The air was cold but clear, the stars blazing overhead with an intensity she had never seen in Boston's smoke-filled skies. Jonah found her a few minutes later, wrapping his coat around her shoulders. "Cold?" he asked. "Just needed some air. It's a lot, isn't it? All the people, all the noise." "Too much?" "No, just different. I spent so many years being alone, being invisible, having all these people care about me, celebrate with me. It takes some getting used to." Jonah stood beside her, looking up at the stars. "They'll grow on you, the townspeople, I mean. They're rough around the edges, but they're good. They look out for each other." "I can see that." She leaned against him, drawing comfort from his warmth. "Jonah?" "Yes?" "Thank you for the letters, for coming to find me, for giving me a chance at this life. He turned to face her, his expression serious. You gave yourself this chance, Eliza. You made the decision to answer the advertisement. You made the journey west. You walked through a blizzard rather than give up. I may have found you in the snow, but you're the one who got yourself there. We saved each other then. We saved each other. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. From inside the church hall came the sounds of music and laughter, the celebration continuing without them. Finally, Jonah spoke again. Are you ready to go home? Home. The word sent a thrill through her. Yes, she said, I'm ready. They collected Tommy, who had fallen asleep in a corner, and said their goodbyes to the remaining guests. Then, wrapped in coats and blankets against the cold, they began the ride to the ranch, the three of them together, a family at last. The ranch house appeared out of the darkness, lamplight glowing in the windows where Samuel had thoughtfully prepared for their arrival. It was modest by any standard, a simple wooden structure with a broad porch and a stone chimney, but to Eliza, it was the most beautiful building she had ever seen. Jonah carried the sleeping Tommy inside while Eliza lingered on the porch, taking it all in. The mountains rose black against the star-filled sky. The snow lay white and peaceful across the fields. An owl called somewhere in the darkness. This was her home now, this vast, wild, beautiful place. She was no longer Eliza Ward of Boston. She was Eliza Callahan of Colorado, and she had never been happier in her life. Jonah emerged from the house and found her still standing there, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. What's wrong? He asked, alarmed. Nothing's wrong. She laughed through her tears. Everything's right. For the first time in my life, everything is exactly right. He gathered her into his arms and held her close. Welcome home, Mrs. Callahan. Thank you, Mr. Callahan, for everything. They stood together on the porch of their home, wrapped in each other's arms, as the night deepened around them and the stars wheeled slowly overhead. The mail-order bride had finally arrived. The first weeks of marriage passed in a blur of discovery and adjustment. Eliza woke each morning before dawn, still not quite believing that the warm body beside her was real, that the ring on her finger was not a dream, that the life she had imagined for so long had finally begun. The ranch house was smaller than she had expected from Jonah's letters, but it was sturdy and warm, built to withstand the brutal Colorado winters. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all in one, dominated by a massive stone fireplace that Jonah kept burning day and night during the cold months. 2 bedrooms branched off from this central space, one for Jonah and Eliza, one for Tommy, and a small root cellar beneath the floor held enough provisions to last until spring. It was nothing like Boston, nothing like the cramped apartment where she had grown up, or the boarding house where she had lived after her parents died. It was rougher, simpler, more demanding in every way. And Eliza loved it. She threw herself into the work of the ranch with an enthusiasm that surprised even Jonah. She learned to cook on the cast iron stove, burning her first 3 attempts at bread before finally producing a loaf that was edible. She learned to preserve meat, to make candles, to mend clothes with the limited supplies available. She learned the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings, the constant physical labor, the bone-deep exhaustion that came with working the land. Some lessons were harder than others. The chickens, for instance, proved to be her nemesis. The flock of 12 hens that provided the ranch's eggs seemed to have collectively decided that Eliza was their sworn enemy. Every morning when she went to collect eggs, they attacked her with a ferocity that seemed disproportionate to their size, pecking at her hands and flapping their wings in her face. I don't understand, she complained to Jonah one morning, nursing a particularly vicious wound on her thumb. I'm trying to help them. I feed them. I give them water. I keep their coop clean. Why do they hate me? Jonah tried very hard not to laugh. He failed. They don't hate you, he said, his shoulders shaking with suppressed mirth. They're just protective of their eggs. You have to show them who's boss. I tried that. Henrietta nearly took my eye out. Henrietta? The big red one. I've named them all. It seemed only fair since they're clearly plotting my demise. This time Jonah couldn't contain his laughter. It burst out of him, loud and genuine, filling the kitchen with warmth. Eliza found herself laughing too, despite her injured thumb, despite the ridiculousness of being defeated by poultry. These were the moments she treasured most, the unexpected joy that bubbled up in the midst of ordinary days, the intimacy of shared laughter, the growing ease between them. Tommy, too, was adjusting to the new reality. He had accepted Eliza with a wholehearted enthusiasm that still moved her to tears when she thought about it. He called her Ma without hesitation now, sought her out for comfort when he was scared, proudly showed her his schoolwork when he did well. The walls that had surrounded his heart for 6 years were slowly coming down, brick by brick. But there were still difficult moments. One night, about 3 weeks after the wedding, Eliza woke to the sound of crying. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Jonah, and padded down the hall to Tommy's room. The boy was sitting up in bed, his face wet with tears, his small body shaking with sobs. "Tommy?" Eliza sat on the edge of his bed and gathered him into her arms. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" "I had a dream," he choked out. "About Ma. My real Ma." Eliza felt a sharp pain in her chest, but she kept her voice gentle. "Tell me about it." "She was here, in this house. She was cooking breakfast and everything smelled like it used to, and I ran to her and she picked me up and—" His voice broke. "And then I woke up, and she's still gone." Eliza held him tighter, her own tears falling into his hair. "I know, sweetheart. I know it hurts." "I don't want to forget her," Tommy whispered. "But sometimes I can't remember what she looked like, or what her voice sounded like. It's like she's fading away and I can't stop it. Listen to me." Eliza pulled back so she could look into his eyes. "Your Ma is not fading away. She's part of you, Tommy. She's in your smile, in your laugh, in the way you love horses, and the way you never give up when things get hard. She lives on through you." "But what if I forget completely?" "Then your pa and I will remind you. We'll tell you stories about her, keep her memory alive. That's what families do. They remember together." Tommy was quiet for a moment, processing her words. Then, in a small voice, he asked, "Do you think she'd be okay with you, being my ma now?" The question hit Eliza like a physical blow. She thought about Catherine, the woman she had never met but felt she knew through Jonah's stories, through the traces she had left behind in this house. The curtains she had sewn, now faded and patched. The quilt on Tommy's bed, made with her own hands. The love that still lingered in every corner, despite her absence. "I think," Eliza said carefully, "that your ma loved you more than anything in the world. And I think she would want you to be happy, to be loved, to have a family. She wouldn't want you to spend your life missing her so much that you forgot to live." "So she'd be okay with it?" "I believe she would. I believe she'd be grateful that someone is here to love you and your pa, to take care of you, to help you grow up strong and good." Eliza wiped the tears from his cheeks. "I'm not trying to take her place, Tommy. No one could ever do that. But I really hope, that there's room in your heart for both of us." Tommy was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "There's room," he said. "I think there's always been room. I just didn't know it until you came." They sat together in the darkness, holding each other, until Tommy's breathing slowed and his body relaxed into sleep. Eliza laid him gently back against his pillow, tucked the quilt around him, and pressed a kiss to his forehead. When she turned to leave, she found Jonah standing in the doorway. He was crying. "How long have you been there?" she whispered. "Long enough." His voice was thick with emotion. "Eliza, I don't know how to thank you. What you just did for him. I didn't do anything special. I just told him the truth. The truth isn't always easy to say or to hear." Jonah crossed the room and took her hands in his. "Catherine would have loved you. I know that with absolute certainty. She would have looked at the woman I married and been at peace, knowing Tommy was in good hands." Eliza felt tears slide down her cheeks. "You really think so?" "I know so. And I need you to hear something else." He met her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I loved Catherine. I loved her with everything I had. When she died, I thought that part of me died with her." "Jonah, you don't have to—" "Let me finish." He squeezed her hands gently. "I thought I would never love anyone again. I thought my heart was too scarred, too broken, too empty. But then you came. And you didn't try to fill the space Catherine left. You created a new space. A space that belongs only to you. What are you saying? I'm saying that I love you, Eliza. Not as a replacement for Catherine, not as a second choice, not as a consolation prize. I love you, for your courage, your kindness, your stubborn refusal to give up even when the world is trying to kill you. You are not a chapter in someone else's story. You are the beginning of a whole new book. Eliza couldn't speak. She could barely breathe. No one had ever said anything like that to her. No one had ever seen her so clearly, valued her so completely. She did the only thing she could think of. She kissed him. It was not the gentle, tentative kiss of their wedding day. It was deeper, more passionate, filled with all the emotion she couldn't put into words. Jonah responded in kind, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her close, the two of them lost in each other while the winter wind howled outside. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Jonah rested his forehead against hers. I should probably let you get back to sleep, he murmured. Probably, she agreed. Neither of them moved. Or, Jonah said slowly, a hint of mischief in his voice, we could stay up a little longer. And do what? I have some ideas. Eliza smiled, a real smile, full of joy and desire and the giddy excitement of new love. Show me, she said. And he did. As winter deepened, Eliza learned that life on a Colorado ranch was not just challenging, it was sometimes terrifying. The blizzard came without warning in early February, howling down from the mountains with a fury that made the storm she had survived seem gentle by comparison. Within hours, the ranch was buried under 3 feet of snow, with drifts piling even higher against the walls of the house and barn. The cattle were in danger. Jonah had moved most of the herd to the lower pastures before winter set in, but a group of about 30 head had gotten separated during a previous storm and were now trapped in the upper range, cut off from food and shelter. I have to go after them, Jonah said, pulling on his heaviest coat. In this? Eliza gestured at the window, where snow was falling so thick it was impossible to see more than a few feet. You'll die out there. If I don't go, they'll die. 30 head of cattle is the difference between surviving the winter and losing everything. Then let me come with you. Absolutely not. Jonah? No. His voice was firm, brooking no argument. You nearly died in a storm like this less than 2 months ago. I won't risk losing you again. And I won't risk losing you. If something happens out there, if you get hurt or lost, then you stay here with Tommy, keep the home fires burning, and wait for me to come back. And if you don't come back? The question hung between them, heavy and terrible. Jonah crossed the room and took her face in his hands. I will come back, he said. I have too much to live for now. I have you, I have Tommy, I have a future I never thought I'd have. Do you really think I'd throw that away? I think the mountains don't care about your reasons for living. I think the cold doesn't care about your hopes and dreams. Then I'll just have to be smarter than the mountains and faster than the cold. Despite her fear, Eliza almost smiled. You're impossible. So I've been told. He kissed her, hard, quick, full of unspoken promises. I'll be back before nightfall. Keep Tommy safe, keep yourself safe, and for God's sake, stay away from those chickens. She laughed despite herself, the sound coming out as half a sob. Be careful. Always. He was gone before she could say anything else, swallowed by the white curtain of falling snow. The hours that followed were the longest of Eliza's life. She tried to keep busy, cooking, cleaning, playing games with Tommy to distract both of them from the fear that gnawed at their hearts. But every few minutes, her eyes drifted to the window, searching for any sign of movement in the endless white. Nothing. Tommy was quieter than usual, his young face pale with worry. He understood the danger better than most children his age. He had grown up on this land, had seen what winter could do. Pa's going to be okay, he said at one point, though it sounded more like a question than a statement. Of course he is, Eliza replied, forcing confidence into her voice. Your father is the strongest, most stubborn man in Colorado. A little snow won't stop him. It's not a little snow. No, it's not. She pulled Tommy close. But your father survived worse odds when he came to find me, remember? He rode into a blizzard with nothing but faith and determination. He'll do the same now. What if he doesn't? The question was quiet, almost too quiet to hear. Eliza felt her heart clench. Then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, she said. But until then, we believe. We hope. We keep the fire burning and the door unlocked. That's what families do. They wait for each other. Tommy nodded slowly, accepting her words even if he couldn't quite believe them. They waited. The afternoon crawled by. The light outside dimmed as the storm intensified, turning the world into a swirling gray chaos. Eliza found herself praying, something she hadn't done since her parents died. She wasn't even sure who she was praying to, but the words came anyway, flowing up from some deep place inside her. Please, please let him come home. Please don't take him from us. As darkness fell, she began to prepare for the worst. She banked the fire high, checked the supplies, made sure she and Tommy could survive alone if necessary. She tried not to think about what that survival would look like. The long, cold months ahead, the empty place at the table, the shattered dreams. She was so lost in these dark thoughts that she almost didn't hear it. A sound. Outside. The whinny of a horse, muffled by the snow. Eliza flew to the door and yanked it open, a blast of icy wind nearly knocking her backward. Through the swirling white, she saw a shape emerging, a horse, then a rider, then a line of cattle plodding wearily behind them. Jonah. He was covered in ice, his face nearly blue with cold, his body slumped with exhaustion. But he was alive. He was home. Jonah! Eliza ran out into the snow, not caring about the cold, not caring about anything except reaching him. He slid from the saddle and caught her in his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. I told you, he mumbled against her hair. I told you I'd come back. You're frozen. You're barely standing. Come inside now. The cattle. Samuel is coming. I sent word before the storm hit. This was a lie. She had done no such thing, but Jonah was too exhausted to notice. Come inside, please. He let her lead him into the house, stumbling over the threshold. Tommy was there, flinging himself at his father, crying with relief. Eliza stripped off Jonah's frozen coat, his ice-crusted gloves, his boots that had been soaked through. She wrapped him in blankets, pressed hot coffee into his shaking hands, built the fire up until the room was almost unbearably warm. I found them, Jonah said, his voice rough with cold. All 30 head, huddled in a ravine, half buried in snow. I don't know how I found them. Luck, maybe, or something else. Divine intervention, Eliza said softly. Maybe. Whatever it was, I'll take it. As the night deepened and Jonah's body slowly warmed, Eliza sat beside him, holding his hand, watching him breathe. She had come so close to losing him, so close to becoming a widow before she had really been a wife. Don't ever do that again, she said. I can't promise that. This is ranch life, Eliza. There will always be storms, always be dangers. I can't hide from them. I know, She trailed off, unable to find the words. I know, he said, squeezing her hand. I feel the same way. Every time I think about you walking through that blizzard, my heart stops. But we can't live in fear. All we can do is make the most of the time we have. Is that what you believe? It's what Catherine taught me. When she was dying, she told me not to waste my life mourning her. She told me to find happiness, to raise Tommy with joy, to embrace whatever future came my way. His voice cracked slightly. It took me 6 years to understand what she meant, but I understand now. Eliza leaned her head against his shoulder. She sounds like a wise woman. She was. You would have liked her. I think I would have. They sat together in comfortable silence, the fire crackling, the storm still raging outside. But inside, they were warm and safe and together. And that was enough. Spring arrived slowly, grudgingly, as if the Colorado mountains were reluctant to release their grip on the land. But bit by bit, the snow began to melt. The creek swelled with runoff. Green shoots appeared in the meadows, and the cattle grew fat on the new grass. For Eliza, spring brought something else entirely. She had suspected for weeks, but hadn't wanted to say anything until she was sure. Now, sitting across from Dr. Harrison in his small office in Salida, she had confirmation. Congratulations, Mrs. Callahan, the doctor said with a rare smile. You're going to have a baby. A baby. A child of her own. Eliza walked home in a daze, her mind spinning with the implications. She was going to be a mother, not just to Tommy, whom she loved with all her heart, but to a child she would carry in her own body, bring into the world with her own strength. How would Jonah react? Would he be happy? Terrified? Both? How would Tommy feel about a new sibling? Would he see it as a threat, a replacement, or a blessing? How would she manage the pregnancy on a working ranch with all its demands and dangers? The questions swirled through her head as she made the long ride back to the ranch. By the time she arrived, she had worked herself into a state of nervous excitement that made her hands shake as she tied up her horse. Jonah was in the barn, repairing a broken harness. He looked up as she entered, his face breaking into a smile that still made her heart flutter, even after months of marriage. "You're back early," he said. "How was the trip to town?" "Eventful." She took a deep breath. "Jonah, I need to tell you something." His smile faded, replaced by concern. "What's wrong? Is it your hands? Are they—" "My hands are fine. Everything is fine." She crossed the barn and took his hands in hers. "Better than fine, actually." "Liza, you're scaring me. What's going on?" She looked into his eyes, those kind, worried, beautiful eyes, and felt all her fear melt away. "I'm pregnant," she said. "We're going to have a baby." For a long moment, Jonah just stared at her. His expression was completely blank, unreadable. Eliza felt her heart sink. He wasn't happy. He didn't want this. She had misread everything. And then he burst into tears. Not quiet, dignified tears, but great racking sobs that shook his entire body. He pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she thought her ribs might crack, crying into her hair, whispering words she couldn't quite make out. "Jonah?" She pulled back, alarmed. "What's wrong? Are you upset?" "Upset?" He laughed through his tears. "Eliza, I'm the happiest man alive. A baby. Our baby. I never thought, after Catherine—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Understanding dawned. After Catherine died, Jonah had given up hope of having more children. He had resigned himself to being a father of one, to watching his family line end with Tommy. And now, against all odds, he was being given another chance. "You're happy?" Eliza asked, just to be sure. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it." He kissed her, hard, desperate, full of joy. "Thank you. Thank you for coming into my life. Thank you for this gift. Thank you for everything. I think you had something to do with it too." A minor contribution. He was grinning now, tears still streaming down his face. "We have to tell Tommy and Samuel and the whole town. Everyone needs to know. Maybe we could keep it between us for a little while, just until we're sure everything is okay?" Jonah nodded, visibly struggling to contain his excitement. You're right, of course. But Eliza—" He took her face in his hands. "This is the second best thing that's ever happened to me." "Second best?" "The best was the day you walked into my life. Nothing will ever top that." Eliza felt tears prick at her own eyes. "You're going to make me cry." "Good. Then we'll match." They stood in the barn, holding each other, laughing and crying at the same time. Outside, the spring sun shone warm on the melting snow, and somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang. Life on the Colorado frontier was hard, unpredictable, sometimes terrifying. But it was also full of moments like this, moments of pure, unexpected joy that made everything else worthwhile. Eliza Callahan had traveled across a continent, survived a blizzard, and nearly died in the mountains. And she would do it all again in a heartbeat. Because this life, this family, this love was worth every step of the journey. They told Tommy that evening, sitting around the dinner table after a meal of roasted chicken and fresh bread. The boy listened with wide eyes as Jonah explained that come autumn, there would be a new member of the Callahan family. "A baby?" Tommy repeated, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "A real baby?" "A real baby," Eliza confirmed. "A brother or sister for you." Tommy was quiet for a moment, his young face unreadable. Eliza felt a flutter of anxiety. What if he resented this? What if he felt replaced, pushed aside? But then Tommy's face broke into the biggest grin she had ever seen. I'm going to be a big brother, he shouted, leaping up from his chair. I'm going to teach the baby everything, how to ride horses, how to fish, how to— Maybe let the baby learn to walk first, Jonah suggested, laughing. Right, walking first, then horses. Tommy rushed around the table and threw his arms around Eliza. Thank you, Ma. Thank you for giving me a brother. It might be a sister, Eliza pointed out. Then I'll teach her to ride horses too. Girls can ride horses. Miss Sarah rides better than most of the men in town. Eliza laughed, hugging him tight. You're going to be a wonderful big brother, Tommy. I know it. That night, after Tommy had finally calmed down enough to sleep, Eliza stood on the porch of the ranch house, looking up at the stars. So much had changed since that desperate day when she had left Boston with nothing but a trunk full of clothes and a heart full of hope. She had survived a journey that should have killed her. She had found love in the most unlikely of places. She had become a wife, a mother, a member of a community that had welcomed her with open arms, and now she was going to bring a new life into the world. The door opened behind her, and Jonah stepped out to join her. Can't sleep? He asked. Too much to think about. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. Good thoughts? The best. She leaned back against him. I was just thinking about how different my life is now. A year ago, I was working in a factory, barely surviving, with nothing to look forward to. Now I have everything I ever wanted. A home, a family, a future. She turned in his arms to face him. And you, especially you. Jonah kissed her forehead. I feel the same way. You've given me more than I ever dared to hope for, Eliza. A second chance at happiness. A son who smiles again. And now a new baby. His voice grew thick with emotion. I don't know what I did to deserve all this. Maybe it's not about deserving. Maybe it's about being brave enough to reach for what you want. You reached for me when you placed that advertisement. I reached for you when I answered it, and somehow, against all odds, we found each other. The luckiest reach of my life. Mine too. They stood together under the vast Colorado sky, wrapped in each other's arms, dreaming of the future. The mountains rose around them, ancient and eternal, witnesses to a love story that had begun with ink on paper and grown into something that would last for generations. Eliza thought about the child growing inside her, the new life that would soon join their family. She thought about Tommy, asleep in his bed, finally healing from wounds that had plagued him for years. She thought about Jonah, this strong and tender man who had ridden through a blizzard to save a woman he had never met. She thought about Catherine, the first Mrs. Callahan, whose memory would always be honored in this house. And she thought about herself, the factory girl from Boston who had dared to dream of something more. That girl felt like a stranger now, a distant memory, someone from another life. But Eliza didn't mourn her. She celebrated her, because that frightened, desperate girl had found the courage to take a chance on the impossible. And look where it had led. The spring wind rustled through the pines, carrying with it the scent of new growth and the promise of warmer days ahead. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called to its mate. Eliza Callahan closed her eyes and smiled. She was home. The summer passed in a golden haze of long days and warm nights. Eliza's belly grew round with the child inside her, and the entire town of Salida seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. Women stopped her on the street to offer advice, share remedies for morning sickness, and predict whether she was carrying a boy or a girl based on the shape of her stomach and the way she walked. Tommy became her constant shadow, fascinated by the changes in her body and full of questions about where babies came from and how they got out. Eliza answered as honestly as she could, watching his face shift from confusion to wonder to something approaching awe. "The baby can hear us?" he asked one evening, pressing his ear against her swollen belly. "That's what the doctor says. By now, the baby knows our voices. Then I should talk to it, so it knows me when it comes out." He cleared his throat importantly and addressed her stomach directly. "Hello in there. I'm Tommy. I'm going to be your big brother. I'm going to teach you everything important, like how to ride horses and how to catch frogs and how to sneak extra biscuits from the kitchen when Ma isn't looking." "I heard that," Eliza said. "I know. I wanted the baby to learn early that you have very good ears." She laughed, running her fingers through his hair. In the months since her arrival, Tommy had transformed from a shy, wounded boy into a confident, happy child who laughed easily and loved freely. The change still amazed her and humbled her. She had come to Colorado hoping to find love for herself. She had never expected to give so much of it away. Jonah watched these interactions with quiet joy. He had grown more relaxed over the summer, the worry lines around his eyes softening as the ranch prospered and his family flourished. The cattle were healthy, the crops were growing, and for the first time in years he allowed himself to believe that the worst was behind them. "You're different," Samuel observed one afternoon, as they mended fences together in the upper pasture. "Lighter somehow, like you've finally set down a weight you've been carrying." "I have," Jonah admitted. "I didn't realize how heavy it was until it was gone." "Eliza did that for you." "She did. She does. Every day." He paused, hammer in hand, and looked out over the land he had worked for 15 years. "I used to think this ranch was my life's work, the legacy I'd leave behind. But now I realize it was never about the land. It was about the people on it. Catherine understood that. It took me too long to figure it out. Better late than never. That's what I keep telling myself." The autumn arrived with a riot of color, the aspens turning gold, the oaks burning orange and red, the mountains dusted with the first snow of the season. And with autumn came the baby. Eliza's labor began on a cool October morning, just as the sun was rising over the eastern peaks. She woke to a sharp pain in her lower back, followed by a tightening across her belly that took her breath away. "Jonah," she gasped, shaking him awake. "It's time." What followed was the longest day of Jonah's life. Dr. Harrison arrived within the hour, accompanied by Mrs. Patterson and Sarah, who had appointed themselves as Eliza's attendants, whether she wanted them or not. They banished Jonah from the bedroom, despite his protests, and told him to keep Tommy occupied. "This is women's work," Mrs. Patterson declared firmly. "You'd just be in the way." "But she's my wife." "And she'll still be your wife when this is over. Now go." So Jonah paced. He paced the length of the main room, from fireplace to front door and back again, until Tommy complained that he was making him dizzy. He tried to sit, but couldn't stay still. He tried to eat, but the food turned to ash in his mouth. He tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. All he could do was wait. The hours crawled by. From behind the closed bedroom door came sounds that made his blood run cold. Eliza's cries of pain, the murmured voices of the women attending her, occasional alarming silences that seemed to stretch into eternity. "Is Ma going to be okay?" Tommy asked, his face pale with worry. "Of course she is," Jonah said, with more confidence than he felt. "Your Ma is the strongest woman I know. She walked through a blizzard to get to us. A little thing like childbirth isn't going to stop her." "It doesn't sound little." No, Jonah thought, it doesn't. As the afternoon wore into evening, Dr. Harrison emerged from the bedroom. His face was grave, and Jonah felt his heart stop. "Is she—" "She's fine," the doctor said quickly. "Exhausted, but fine. The labor is progressing slowly, but there are no complications. It's just taking time." "How much more time?" "I can't say. Every birth is different." Harrison put a hand on Jonah's shoulder. "She's asking for you." Jonah was through the door before the doctor finished speaking. Eliza lay in their bed, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, her face pale and drawn. But when she saw him, she smiled, a weak smile, but genuine. "There you are," she whispered. "I was starting to think you'd run off." "Never." He crossed to the bed and took her hand. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm being torn apart from the inside." Another contraction seized her, and she gripped his hand so hard he thought his bones might break. When it passed, she let out a shaky breath. "I don't remember signing up for this part." "You didn't read the fine print." "Clearly." She closed her eyes. "Stay with me, please." "I'm not going anywhere." The hours that followed were a blur of pain and fear and desperate hope. Jonah held Eliza's hand through every contraction, whispered words of encouragement when she faltered, wiped her brow when the sweat poured down her face. He watched her fight, watched her push through exhaustion and agony and doubt, and fell in love with her all over again. As midnight approached, something changed. The contractions came faster, harder. Eliza's cries grew louder. Dr. Harrison positioned himself at the foot of the bed, his face tense with concentration. "I can see the head," he announced. "Eliza, I need you to push. Push as hard as you can." Eliza screamed, a raw, primal sound that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her body. She bore down with every ounce of strength she had left, her hand crushing Jonah's, her face contorted with effort. And then, suddenly, a different cry filled the room. Thin and reedy, but unmistakably alive. "It's a girl," Dr. Harrison announced, holding up a tiny, squalling bundle. A healthy baby girl. Eliza collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face. Jonah stood frozen, unable to process what he was seeing. A girl. A daughter. His daughter. Mrs. Patterson cleaned this baby and wrapped her in a soft blanket, then placed her in Eliza's arms. The crying stopped almost immediately, replaced by small, snuffling sounds as the infant rooted instinctively toward her mother. "She's perfect," Eliza whispered, her voice breaking. "Jonah, look at her. She's perfect." He looked. He saw a tiny face, red and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that were squeezed shut against the brightness of the world. He saw 10 perfect fingers and 10 perfect toes. He saw the future, all the possibilities, all the hopes and dreams that this small life represented. And he wept. He wept for joy, for relief, for the overwhelming love that flooded through him. He wept for Catherine, who would never see this moment, and for himself, who almost didn't live to see it either. He wept for the miracle of new life, for the second chance he had been given, for the woman who had made it all possible. "What should we name her?" Eliza asked. Jonah thought for a moment. He thought about the journey that had brought them here, the letters, the blizzard, the desperate search, the slow building of a life together. He thought about hope and courage and the stubborn refusal to give up. "Hope," he said. "Her name should be Hope." Eliza looked down at the baby in her arms, then back up at her husband. "Hope Catherine Callahan," she said softly, "for the future and the past." Jonah couldn't speak. He simply nodded, tears still streaming down his face. In the main room, Tommy had fallen asleep on the floor, exhausted from hours of worried waiting. But he woke when Jonah emerged from the bedroom, scrambling to his feet with wild eyes. "Is Ma okay? Is the baby? Come see for yourself." Jonah led him into the bedroom, where Eliza sat propped against the pillows, the baby cradled in her arms. Tommy approached slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might break the spell. "It's a girl," Eliza said. "Your baby's sister. Her name is Hope." Tommy stared at the tiny face peeking out from the blankets. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, very gently, he reached out and touched the baby's hand. Hope's fingers closed around his. "She's holding me," Tommy breathed. "Ma, she's holding my finger." "She knows you," Eliza said. "Remember all those months you talked to her? She knows your voice." Tommy looked up, his eyes shining with wonder. "Hi, Hope," he whispered. "I'm Tommy. I'm your big brother. I'm going to take care of you forever, okay? I promise." The baby made a small sound, not quite a coo, not quite a cry, and Tommy laughed with pure delight. "She answered me. Did you hear that? She answered me." Jonah put his arm around his son, pulling him close. His family, his whole family gathered in this small room, healthy and whole and together. "Thank you," he said to Eliza, his voice rough with emotion. "For what?" "For everything. For answering my advertisement. For surviving the journey. For loving my son. For giving me a daughter. For making me believe in second chances." Eliza smiled, that beautiful, radiant smile that had first captivated him through her letters and now lit up his every day. "Thank you for coming to find me," she said. "In the snow, in the storm, when everyone else would have given up. You came for me, Jonah. You saved my life. You saved mine first." They stayed there, the four of them, as the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead. The fire crackled in the hearth, warming the room. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, soft and gentle this time, nothing like the deadly blizzard that had almost claimed Eliza's life. A year ago, Jonah thought, I was alone, grieving, convinced my best days were behind me. Now look at us. He pressed a kiss to Eliza's forehead, then to Hope's downy hair, then to the top of Tommy's head. I love you, he said. All of you. More than I ever thought possible. We love you too, Pa, Tommy said. Even when you snore. I don't snore. You do, Eliza confirmed, like a bear with a head cold. This is mutiny. I'm being attacked by my own family. Get used to it, Eliza said, grinning. This is what you signed up for. I wouldn't have it any other way. The winter that followed was the hardest Salida had seen in years. Storm after storm battered the mountains, burying the town under feet of snow, cutting off the passes for months at a time. But in the Callahan ranch house, there was only warmth. Hope grew quickly, transforming from a wrinkled newborn into a chubby, gurgling infant who smiled at everyone and seemed especially delighted by her big brother. Tommy doted on her with a devotion that bordered on obsession, spending every spare moment making faces at her, singing songs, telling her elaborate stories about horses and adventures. Eliza watched her children, both of them, in every way that mattered, and felt a contentment she had never known existed. The factory girl from Boston, the orphan who had risked everything on a stranger's promise, had found her place in the world. On Christmas Eve, the whole town gathered at the church for a celebration. The building was decorated with evergreen boughs and candles, filling the air with the scent of pine and wood smoke. Children ran through the aisles, excited beyond reason. Adults clustered in groups, sharing news and gossip and predictions for the year ahead. Eliza sat in the front pew, Hope sleeping peacefully in her arms, Tommy fidgeting beside her, Jonah's steady presence at her shoulder. The Reverend read the familiar story, the journey to Bethlehem, the birth in a manger, the hope of the world arriving in the humblest of circumstances. And Eliza thought about her own journey, the long road from Boston, the blizzard that had nearly killed her, the man who had ridden through the storm to save her. She thought about hope, not just her daughter, but the feeling itself. The stubborn, irrational belief that things could get better, that love was worth the risk, that second chances were possible if only you had the courage to reach for them. What are you thinking about? Jonah whispered. About how far we've come, she whispered back. About how much has changed in a year. Any regrets? Not a single one. He took her hand and squeezed it gently. Good, because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you never have any. That's a big promise. I'm a big promiser. She laughed softly, drawing a disapproving look from Mrs. Patterson in the pew behind them. But Eliza didn't care. Let the old woman disapprove. Let the whole world disapprove. She had everything she had ever wanted, and nothing could dim her joy. After the service, as the congregation spilled out into the snowy night, Samuel approached with a wide grin. I have news, he announced. I've been waiting to tell you until the moment was right. What news? Jonah asked. I'm getting married in the spring. Samuel's grin widened. I've been writing to a woman in St. Louis for the past 6 months. She's agreed to come west. Her name is Margaret. Eliza's eyes widened. Samuel, that's wonderful. A mail-order bride? You made it look so appealing I thought I'd try my luck. Jonah clapped his friend on the shoulder. Congratulations. I hope you're as happy as we are. That's a high bar to clear. You'll manage. As they walked home through the falling snow, Tommy running ahead with the energy of the perpetually young, Eliza thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. A newspaper advertisement, a stack of letters, a desperate gamble on the unknown. And now this. A husband who loved her, children who needed her, a community that had welcomed her as one of their own, a life richer and fuller than anything she had ever imagined. The ranch house appeared through the trees, lamplight glowing warm in the windows. Home. Merry Christmas, Eliza, Jonah said. Merry Christmas, Jonah. They paused at the gate, looking up at their house, at the life they had built together against all odds. You know, Jonah said thoughtfully, I never did thank you properly. For what? For answering that advertisement. For taking a chance on a lonely widower in the middle of nowhere. For believing that love could bloom between strangers. You don't have to thank me. I got as much as I gave. Maybe more. Maybe. She smiled up at him. But who's counting? He kissed her then, softly, tenderly, with all the love he had spent a lifetime learning to express. The snow fell around them, gentle and white, blanketing the world in peace. Tommy appeared at the front door, Hope's cry echoing from inside. "Ma! Pa! The baby's awake and she's hungry, and I don't know what to do." Eliza laughed. "Duty calls. It always does." They walked up the path together, hand in hand, and stepped into the warmth of their home. Behind them, the door closed against the winter night. Inside, the fire blazed, the baby cried. Tommy demanded attention, and life, beautiful, chaotic, ordinary life, continued. Years later, people in Salida would still tell the story. They would tell it to their children and grandchildren, embellishing with each retelling until it became the stuff of legend. The story of the mail-order bride who never arrived. The story of the cowboy who rode into a blizzard to find her. The story of a love that began with ink on paper and grew into something that changed lives, built families, and proved that hope, stubborn, irrational, impossible hope, could conquer even the coldest winter. And somewhere in that story, always, was the image of a man lifting a frozen woman from the snow, and her eyes fluttering open, and her cracked lips forming a single word. "Jonah, I knew you would come." The end.